Have you ever felt that the dark night is not simply silence, but a refuge of inexplicable things? Sometimes, the sounds in the dark become the only voice, leading us into a world full of mystery and horror. Hello friends, I'm your storyteller, and today I'm going to take you on a journey through strange stories that won't leave you unsettled, even when you're lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. Before we begin, be sure to hit like and subscribe, so you don't miss out on the next mysterious and scary stories. This is the most precious gift, giving me more motivation to continue telling stories. Now, close your eyes, relax. Let the sound of rain lead you into another world. You may have heard about darkness, the shadow that is always present when light recedes. But have you ever felt that this darkness has its own consciousness? That's what I began to notice 3 weeks ago, when the shadows in my office stopped just standing still. They began to move, slowly, like living creatures. Every time I turned away, they came closer, just waiting for me to look at them. At first, I thought it was just a mind game. My mind, the rational mind of a historian, always tries to find reasonable explanations. But then, the gaps in my memory and the strange handwritten pages I found made me change my way of thinking. I bought a Ouija board, an ancient item that seems to be only for curious people who like to take risks with the unexplainable. Is anyone there? I asked, placing my hand on the planchette, my fingers trembling with cold and anxiety. The answer didn't come right away, but when it did, I knew I had entered a world where reason no longer had control. Yes, James. This name is like a curse, pulling me into the past, into memories that I have long tried to forget. Why James? I never revealed my name, never mentioned my mother, but there was something in the air, in the dark room, that made it impossible for me to continue this conversation. Still, my curiosity and desire to explore history kept me going. And then, a strange voice appeared, carrying the promise of long-lost knowledge. I have the knowledge you seek. But you must help me. Amid the cold of the room and the sound of the rain outside, an agreement was forged, not just with an entity but perhaps, a force from another era. We still think we can control everything, but the truth is, there are things that cannot be controlled. I began to find ancient documents, forgotten manuscripts in libraries, confirming things that science could not explain. And with every step, I felt something was watching me, not only through the darkness but also in every written word, every memory of myself. That night, when I found what the entity in the Ouija board had instructed me to do, I realized that I was lost in a world where all historical theories were turned upside down. But at that price, I lost a part of myself. The planchette continued to move, but this time, it did not simply go through the letters. It rotated, drawing a figure 8, an unusual image, as if it was saying something beyond my imagination. And then, the planchette slowly wrote out a sentence, "Thank you for your hospitality. It feels like I invited something into my life, and now I can't easily banish it." When I woke up the next morning, I found myself lying motionless on the living room floor, my eyes closed. I can't remember how long I was there, only that 12 hours passed in an unknown space. My mouth tasted of copper and earth, a strange feeling, as if I had been transported into another world where time and space no longer held sway. As I continued to research, my notebook filled up with handwritten pages that I was sure were not mine. The lines have a strange difference, the letters are more slanted, the outlines more disordered. In particular, these notes contain detailed information about the plague, numbers and events that no other surviving documents in historical archives can find. They seemed to come from me, but I couldn't understand how. I spent days verifying what I could, appraising every piece of evidence I had from obscure sources. Scarily, each piece of evidence matches those mysterious notes. My research progress could not be stopped, and the more I researched, the more I felt like I was being pulled into a bottomless pit. One morning, Professor Winters thanked me for my research on 15th century maritime trade. But I couldn't remember ever talking to her about this subject. Not short discussions, but detailed conversations, to the point where I drew maps, explaining every little detail of the trade routes, even though I had never studied them. And then, I began to feel clear changes in myself. When I looked in the mirror, my face seemed subtly distorted. There was an inexplicable change, as if my ego was no longer myself. Even when I talk, I feel a delay between my thoughts and words, a small disconnect, but enough to make me fear I'm losing control. The notes began to expand beyond the plague, recording historical events across Europe, stories of castles that were destroyed, discussions between historical figures from the 14th century, the private thoughts of the deceased. The more I researched, the closer I felt to an unexplained mystery, and each fragment of that history made me more confused. I decided to install a recording device, hoping to record the strange things going on in my apartment. However, most of the time, these devices are mysteriously disabled. But sometimes, some recordings show inexplicable images, words I have never learned, sometimes a voice that is not mine. On one occasion, I heard myself standing in front of the mirror, my mouth moving and talking to myself, while my eyes never blinked. That recording really scared me. When I listened back, I couldn't believe what I heard, a silent but understanding conversation, a strange exchange between me and my reflection. I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed to the bathroom and vomited, feeling as if I'd drunk something that didn't belong to me. I began to leave questions to myself. Desperate messages taped to mirrors. Who are you? What do you want? When will you leave? Sometimes, I wake up and find the answer, the words seemingly not mine, but someone else's. You know who I am. Knowledge is agreed. Temporary is agreed. Temporary is relative. Each answer made me feel like I was living in a world of uncontrollable things. I started to feel as if I was living in an endless loop, even when sober. At some point, I'll grade the papers, but when I look at the clock, I see that I've lost several hours and can't remember anything. One time, I found myself standing in the kitchen, looking at a half-eaten meal that I didn't remember preparing, a plate of frozen food left behind. It felt like being pushed below the surface of the water, a feeling of pressure weighing on my eyes until I was completely submerged in a darkness that I had no control over. My study of the Black Death, which I thought would be a small study, was published and well received. My colleagues couldn't believe the depth of knowledge I had, the resources I had never known before were at my fingertips. Prestigious universities began calling me to work, and I was invited to speak at conferences. My career was going strong, but I felt like I was living on a treasure trove of knowledge I never learned, things I never accumulated. I tried to let go of the Ouija board that haunted my life. I broke it into pieces and burned them in the fireplace. The flame emitted a strange blue color, not that of normal fire. But the next morning, I found the board intact, with no trace of the fire. It still lies there on my desk, cold and inexplicable. I went to a psychiatrist, hoping to find a reasonable explanation for what was happening. She suggested I try dissociative therapies, but after 2 sessions, she referred me to a colleague who specializes in more severe cases. When I called the number she provided, the phone was disconnected. I returned to the doctor's office, but the receptionist did not have any record of my previous visits. The feeling of insecurity grew more and more, because I couldn't explain what was happening. The entity I was communicating with through the Ouija board began to become bolder, and my blackouts lasted, at times up to a full day. I woke up in a hazy state, completely unable to remember what had happened during that time. One time, I woke up in the middle of dinner at a restaurant across town. A woman I had been dating for a few weeks was sitting across from me, looking at me strangely. She was nervous, then when I asked her what her name was, she started to get scared. I can't remember when we met, or even, I can't remember what we said. This made me realize a horrifying truth: I'm not the only one who's lost my mind. The notes in my research diary became more and more strange. They are not limited to the Black Death anymore. I found detailed documents about the Roman Senate, about Sumerian religious rituals, about intrigues at the Chinese court, all recorded with incredible precision. But I don't know how I got this information, they are not things I have researched. In a moment of great clarity, I decided to go back to the antique store where I first bought the Ouija board. When I returned to the store where I bought the Ouija board, I discovered something strange. The storefront has now become a modern, trendy cafe, with a cozy atmosphere. There were no signs of the old store, no business records were found. The barista, a young woman with bright blue hair, told me that the shop had been open for at least 5 years. But I'm sure it never existed before. What is happening to me? Back in my apartment, I began to notice subtle but unmissable changes. The darkness seemed to last longer than ever, no matter the time of day. The temperature in my apartment started dropping randomly. I walked from the living room to the kitchen and in 3 short steps, I felt a cold air drop by 20 degrees Celsius. Immediately, it returned to normal levels. I can't explain it. The mirrors in my house seemed to come to life. I began to see glimpses of a figure standing behind me in the mirror, visible only from a peripheral perspective. Every time I turned around to look, that figure disappeared. The pressure in my head grew heavier, as if my head was being squeezed by something invisible. My skin changed too, stretching like a too-tight suit. When I talk, my voice comes through, but it sounds like it's coming from another room, not from my own mouth. Out of desperation, I decided to try the Ouija board again, this time with all the fear and doubt in my heart. I placed my hand on the planchette, feeling its coldness. "What are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "A historian like you. When will you leave?" The board began to move slowly and spelled out a date, tomorrow. And then, another message, perfect subject. Perfect container. Thank you for your cooperation. The pressure in my head grew to an unbearable level. The room around me began to tilt sideways. I felt like I was slipping below the surface of consciousness, as if everything I had ever known was fading away. At this point, I quickly picked up a pen and paper, trying to keep my hands from shaking too much, and wrote, "My name is James Blackwood. I exist. I am here." The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling of relief, as if a burden had been lifted. Everything around me seemed clearer than ever. My research is no longer vague, it has shape, it has purpose. And I know exactly what to do next. The Ouija board now sits silently on my desk, no longer a dangerous object, just a tool in my research. But as I continued to research, I discovered a crumpled piece of paper in a notebook. On it was hastily, desperately written, "My name is James Blackwood. I exist. I am here." However, the next lines left me feeling cold. Poor James. Too concerned with his personal identity, too attached to his limited perspective. He does not understand the gift I have given him. He can only study these things from afar, but now I will continue my work through him. This body will serve my purposes well. It is young, healthy, and has a promising academic career ahead. This brain contains useful knowledge, and no one has noticed change. People, especially those around them, never notice the subtle changes taking place. James' transformation is almost complete. The last fragments of him remained only as bubbles trapped under the ice. Soon, they would fade, disappear. Your fear is unnecessary. I kept my end of the bargain. I gave him all the historical knowledge he sought, even though he was no longer able to use it. The fact that he is no longer present to exploit that knowledge is just an unfortunate detail. I made it clear that my stay was temporary. But to me, temporary has a different meaning than it does to him. A century or two in this form, before I need to find another vase, is just a fleeting moment in the history I have witnessed. I smiled as I ran my fingers across the smooth wooden surface of the Ouija board. It is my tool, where I continue my work. I could sense other historians reaching out to similar subjects, looking for knowledge with which to bargain, as I did myself. It's time to start my work. So much history to record, so many secrets to share. But after all, there will be a second story. The story I dismissed the first time, just dismissed it as a hoax. A smudge in my lens, possibly from the corner of a wedding photo I took for Morrison's account. A shadowy shadow, but unmistakable, like a human figure standing separate from the guests in the photo. I pushed it aside, deleted it, and reframed it, blaming my equipment. As a professional photographer with over 15 years of experience, I've seen all kinds of technical problems, but this was something different, which I would soon learn was a real fear. My name is Daniel Weiss. Throughout my career, I've captured people's happiest moments, weddings, anniversaries, graduations. For most of my career, that's all my camera ever recorded. But 3 weeks ago, after Morrison's wedding, things began to change. I noticed strange phenomena appearing in my photos. A dark shadow, always distant, always watching me from afar. Every time I see it, my chest tightens and a chill runs through my body. At first, that shadow only appeared at the edges of crowded scenes, barely attracting attention among groups of guests. I could convince myself it was a technical problem. But with each new photo, the figure gets closer, clearer. Its pale face, featureless, is now the focus of photos where it has no right to exist. I spent hours testing the device, looking for any technical explanation. I took the camera apart, cleaned each part, replaced the lens, but the situation remained unchanged. One evening, while reviewing photos from a corporate event, I saw that the figure had moved from the background to stand directly behind a group of executives. My hands shook as I zoomed in on the photo. Even though it was still blurry, I could make out a tall, thin man in dark clothes. And now, real fear began to seep into me. The face in the photo still had a faint shadow, but I had the distinct feeling that it was looking straight at the camera, straight at me. Suddenly, my apartment became strangely cold. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I glanced toward the dark living room window. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a reflection there. But not mine. It was an elongated, dark figure standing there, outside the window. When I blinked, it disappeared. My heart was pounding as I hastily closed all the curtains and checked the lock twice. The feeling of insecurity kept clinging to me. That night, I could hardly sleep. Every sound in the building, every passing car's headlights, and shadows across the ceiling startled me awake. My mouth was dry, the sheets were soaked with sweat. Exhaustion left me feeling dizzy and paranoid. I decided to cancel my appointments for the day and spend all my time reviewing every photo I had taken over the past month. This pattern, no matter how much one wants to deny it, is inevitable. That figure, whatever it was getting closer with each subsequent photo. Every time I see it, a cold feeling rises in my stomach. Especially in the most recent photos, it is standing right behind the towering subjects, but strangely, this silhouette is not noticed by anyone, other than my camera. I called Lisa, a close colleague, to ask if she had ever experienced anything similar. She laughed at my worries, assuming I was overworked or that someone was playing an elaborate prank on me. I wanted to believe her, but the cold feeling in my stomach told me something was wrong. When the call ended, Lisa asked if I slept well, because she felt I looked terrible. I admit that I don't sleep well, but try to ignore the real reason. That night, I took sleeping pills and fell into bed. When my alarm went off at 7 a.m., I felt relieved to finally be able to sleep through the night. But as my vision gradually cleared, I noticed my laptop open on the table. I clearly remember turning it off before taking the medicine. My body felt like lead as I forced myself out of bed. Every step towards my desk made me feel more and more scared. The computer screen showed my photo management software open, and on it was a folder I didn't recognize. With shaking hands, I clicked on the first image. That's me, sleeping in my bed. The photo was taken from my bedroom door. My lungs tightened as if an invisible hand was squeezing me. The timestamp displayed is 2:17 a.m. I kept clicking on the next image. Another photo, of me sleeping, but closer this time, taken from the foot of my bed. The timestamp is 3:02 a.m. I can't stop scrolling through dozens of similar images. Each photo shows the photographer seeming to get closer to me, closer to my unconscious body. The last photo made me stumble back, knocking over my chair. It's a photo of me from right above, filling the entire frame. And at the edge of the image, was a long, dark finger, reaching toward my face. I hurriedly searched my apartment, opening every closet door, checking the furniture behind everything, but everything was empty. I live alone, but the feeling of being watched weighs on me like an invisible weight. I called in sick for a wedding photo shoot in the afternoon and spent the whole day researching these strange phenomena online. But what I found were just paranormal forums filled with questionable accounts and amateur theories. The rational part of my mind kept trying to insist that there had to be a logical explanation for all that was happening, but the fear kept rising. My computer appears to have suffered a security breach, possibly due to sleepwalking, or maybe just a mental health issue caused by stress. My friend Marcus, a computer security expert, agreed to check my laptop. He didn't find any signs of hacking, but the look on his face showed confusion at my attitude. He suggested I see a doctor, using words like paranoia and hallucinations in a carefully measured tone. 1952, I nodded in agreement, although I knew full well how it all sounded, but I also knew what I saw. That evening, I installed security cameras around the apartment and took a stronger sleeping pill to induce chemical sleep. I left all the lights on and fell asleep, hoping I would have a peaceful night. But my phone's shrill alarm woke me up at 3:17 a.m. 2014, a security alert makes my heart pound so hard I can feel it in my throat. I opened the app to check the footage from the camera. My living room is empty, but the camera detects movement. The video shows the shadow of a streetlight creating a pattern on the wall, then something moving in the corner, a shadow deeper than the surrounding shadows. 2035, that shadow moved like smoke, slowly but purposefully, towards my bedroom door. The video ended abruptly, and I sat stiffly, sweat pouring down my forehead, my mouth so dry I couldn't swallow. Bedroom cameras do not detect motion. Whatever had entered my room was not registered. That night, I sat upright in bed, my back pressed against the wall, my eyes never leaving the bedroom door. 2101, morning light passes through the curtains, revealing an ordinary room. There was no trace of last night's guest. Exhaustion forced me to try to regain my senses and maintain a semblance of normalcy. I booked a date with the Clarks to take their commemorative portraits in the park. But my hands were shaking so much that I struggled to mount the camera on the tripod. 2125, the shoot went smoothly until I reviewed the first batch of photos on my camera screen. Behind the smiling couple, partially hidden by trees, was a figure. More than just a shadow, I could make out a tall, thin figure in old-fashioned black clothes. Its face remained hidden, but I felt its attention fixed on me, as if it were watching my every move. "Is everything okay?" Mr. Clark asked when he noticed me suddenly pouring water. I made an excuse about the lighting and quickly ended the shoot, promising to send them photos later. As the family walked away, I looked around the park frantically. There was no sign of anyone matching the character in my photo. Driving home, I had to check my rearview mirror twice. I thought I saw something dark in the back seat, but when I stopped to check, I couldn't find anything. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. My shirt was soaked with sweat when I got to my apartment. I locked the door and immediately transferred the Clark family photos to my computer. That character appears in every scene, even in different positions in the frame. In the last photo, it's standing right behind me, visible in the reflection of the park fountain, clinging to the edge of the frame. My legs are exhausted. I collapsed into the chair, tremors running through my body. The room seemed to tilt and sway around me as I stared at the screen. In the reflection, the figure's hand was on my shoulder, even though I didn't feel anything at the time. I called Dr. Reynolds, a former client who had given me his personal phone number after I photographed his daughter's wedding. He agreed to meet me immediately. During the drive to his office, I felt a presence in my peripheral vision, a dark figure that disappeared each time I turned to look directly at it. The doctor patiently listened to my story, his expression revealing nothing. After checking my eyes and blood pressure, the doctor said my blood pressure was dangerously high and ordered a blood test. He very carefully mentioned the possibility of stress-induced psychosis and prescribed medication to help me rest. I never mentioned the photos, I knew how it would sound if I did. That night, I swallowed the pill the doctor gave me. Before falling asleep, I remember to turn on the camera and place it on the nightstand, the lens facing the bedroom door. A desperate plan formed in my quiet mind: if I could grasp clear evidence of that presence, I could prove that I was not insane. I woke up as sunlight streamed through the window. For a brief moment, I felt normal, but soon, memories of recent events came flooding back. I took the camera from the nightstand and checked its memory. 27 new photos were taken throughout the night. My hands trembled violently as I looked at each picture. The first few pictures only showed my empty doorway. Then, shadows gathered at the edge of the frame. In the images that followed, the figure appeared, tall and unusually thin, wearing what I could now clearly identify as a black suit from another era. Its face remained obscured, not by darkness, but by a strange distortion, as if reality itself had warped around where its features should have been. The sequence shows it approaching my bed with each painful step. In the last photo, it stands above me, a long hand with long fingers pointing towards the camera. The distortion around its head has been partially removed, revealing what could be eyes, dark sockets that seem to swallow light. I threw the camera across the room with a loud crash. It shattered against the wall, pieces scattering all over my floor. All day long I jumped into the darkness, shivering at every unexpected sound. By evening, I convinced myself to leave my apartment. I booked a hotel room downtown under an assumed name, packed my things, and drove through the city on a winding route, constantly checking to make sure I wasn't being followed. Hotel rooms offer temporary relief, new surroundings, no history. I took a long shower, ordered room service but couldn't eat, and mindlessly watched TV until midnight. Maybe I fell asleep at some point. The sound of my phone taking pictures woke me up. My eyes opened wide, looking into the darkness. My phone dangled above, held by a hand that wasn't mine. The screen illuminated a small portion of my hotel room, enough to see that I wasn't alone. I lay paralyzed, unable to scream or move as the phone landed on my face. Behind it, I caught a glimpse of a familiar distorted face. The phone screen shows the photo you just took. About me, wide-eyed in horror, looking up at the camera. With a surge of desperate energy, I rushed to the bedside lamp and turned it on. Light filled the room, but revealed nothing. I'm alone. My phone was on the bedside table where I had left it. When I shakily checked, there were no new photos. Did I dream it? The line between reality and nightmare has blurred to the point of being unrecognizable. I checked out at dawn and drove aimlessly, eventually finding myself at the city library when it opened. Tucked away in a quiet corner, I researched photography and the occult. Most of the accounts are clearly fabricated or easily explained away, but one article caught my attention. A work on psychic photography from the late 1800s. It mentions a particular photographer who claimed that his camera could capture entities from the other side. His descriptions of these entities matched what I had seen. According to the article, the photographer eventually disappeared under mysterious circumstances. His final diary entry, quoted in part, refers to a presence that passed through the lens of his camera, an entity that found its way through the aperture eye. My blood is cold. The article contained a blurred image of the photographer himself, a thin man in a dark Victorian suit. This revelation affected me with physical force. I'm not haunted by some random entity. The character in my photographs is the photographer or what is left of him. Somehow he got stuck between worlds, using the camera as a portal. And now he has found me. Another photographer. Another potential ship. I drove to a remote place outside the city. My mind is racing. The sun set in a blaze of orange and red as I weighed my options. I could destroy my camera. Give up taking photos completely. But will that stop what has already been started? That entity appeared in my phone, in security cameras that I did not own. It has found a way through. As darkness fell, I noticed a strange light coming from my bag. My backup camera. I forgot I had it with me. I cautiously approached and unzipped the bag. The camera is on, its display glowing. It shows a direct view of the scene where I'm standing, but from a position several feet behind me. I turned around. There's nothing there. When I looked at the screen again, the image had changed. Now it shows me from the front, as if the camera taking the picture is floating in the air in front of me. A message appears on the screen: transfer all images to new server. My finger glides across the screen. At that moment, I understood that photographers don't just find ways to express themselves through the camera. He is looking for a replacement, someone to take his place in the intermediary space between worlds, allowing him to cross over completely. I picked up the camera, feeling its weight in my hand. Many years of my life have been dedicated to capturing moments and preserving memories. Had I somehow opened myself up to this, made a connection through my obsession with seeing what others had missed? The screen flickered, the question was still waiting for an answer. Behind it, I caught my first glimpse of the photographer's face, haggard, forlorn, with eyes that had seen too much. I raised my camera to eye level, pointing it toward the dark scene. Through the viewfinder, I could see the city lights in the distance, glowing in the darkness. Beautiful, worth taking a photo. My finger moves to the shutter button instead of the screen. If the aperture lets something in, perhaps it can also let something out. I started taking dozens, hundreds of photos of the night sky, the distant city, the trees around me. With each press of the shutter button, I felt a subtle change in the air. The weight of observation that had weighed on me for weeks began to lift. When I finally lowered the camera, I was alone in view. The screen went dark. When I turned it back on, the strange question was gone. Only my camera responds normally. I don't know if what I did that night freed me or just bought me time. Sometimes when I look back at my recent photos, I think I catch a glimpse of something in the background. Not a photographer but something else. Something is watching from far away. I still practice photography, but now it's different. I understand the responsibility of the lens, the gate it opens between the observer and the observed. Some moments are not meant to be captured. Some things are not meant to be seen. And sometimes when I hold the camera to my eye, I can't help but wonder what exactly looking back through aperture is. The first symbol appeared on the third night of my spin. A rough carving in the bark of an ancient oak tree, still so fresh that sap oozed from its edges like amber tears. I followed my flashlight over the intricate pattern, concentric circles bisected by jagged lines that didn't seem random. Something gives me goosebumps. I told myself it was just children. Fed-up teenagers from a nearby town deface park property. But even then, in those first moments of innocence, something whispered in the back of my mind that I was wrong. Terrible mistake. My name is Michael Harlow. And for the past 11 years, I've worked as a night watchman at Blackwater State Forest. This job is suitable for me. Solitude, silence, gentle harmony with nature in the most vulnerable moments. I have always preferred being with trees over people, finding peace in their silent wisdom. Most nights pass with a comfortable routine, patrolling marked trails, checking campsites, recording wildlife activity and occasionally redirecting lost hikers or scaring away rowdy youths. My experience prepared me nothing for what began that fall. That symbol annoys me more than it should. I took a photo of it, reported it to my supervisor during the morning handover, and tried to forget about it. Vandalism occasionally occurs. It's part of the job. But that night, back in my protective cottage, I found myself sketching that symbol from memory, unable to shake the feeling that I had seen it somewhere before. 2 nights later, I found another one carved into another tree nearly a mile away from the first one. Same pattern, same depth, same new cuts, deep plastic. This time, standing before it in the crisp night air, I felt watched. The back of my neck tingled, the hairs standing up like silent sentinels. I swept my flashlight through the surrounding darkness, but the dense forest swallowed the beam after 30 feet. Something moved at the edge of that light. A shifting shadow against the darkness. My heartbeat sped up, pounding against my rib cage like it wanted to escape. I called out, my voice thin and unconvincing even to my ears. No response came, but the silence seemed charged, thoughtful. I backed away, maintaining sight of the symbol until I reached the main road. By the end of the week, I had found 7 icons. Management sent someone to remove them, but each carving was replaced within days, appearing in the same place, but cut deeper, more deliberately. At first, the recordings captured nothing but my breathing, crunchy footsteps on fallen leaves, and occasional commentary. But watching them again the next morning, I caught something I had missed. I turned up the volume, straining to make out the faint sounds. They are not English. They aren't in any language I recognize. Syllables slide and twist, consonants stack infinitely on top of each other. I played them for Ranger Martinez during shift changes, but she didn't hear anything unusual, just the wind and distant animals, she said. The concern in her eyes was not for the recording, but for me. She suggested I take a few days off. I didn't. Instead, I started sleeping with my recorder running. The first arrangement appeared the next morning. I discovered it when I opened my cabin door. A careful structure of twigs, pine needles, and what appear to be small rodent bones are arranged in a pattern that mirrors the carving of the tree. My hands shook as I photographed it, then swept it away with my boot. The feeling of violation that washed over me was visceral. Whatever was doing this was on my doorstep while I slept. That night, the shadow seemed deeper. The forest sounded silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. 2 hours into my patrol, I heard it. The footsteps behind me on the trail matched my pace. When I stop, they stop. When I move, they follow, always maintaining the same distance. I turned around several times, the flashlight cutting desperate arcs through the darkness, but found nothing. Then I saw it for the first time. Between 2 ancient pine trees, perhaps 50 yards off the trail, stood a figure, tall, impossibly tall and thin, with skin so pale it seemed to absorb the light of my flashlight instead of reflecting it. It doesn't move. It's simply standing, watching. I couldn't make out its face, but I knew for sure that it was looking straight at me. My body reacted before my mind could process what I was seeing. I ran, the breath tearing from my lungs in gasps, tree branches hitting my face as I abandoned the trail for a more direct route back to my cabin. Inside, with the door locked and the curtains closed, I huddled in bed, shivering violently, my clothes drenched in cold sweat. My heart was beating so hard I was afraid it might burst. I played back the night recording. Through my panicked breathing and the sounds of my footsteps the language was whispered again, more hushed now, clearer. And at this point I saw the number. The whisper stopped, replaced by a single, clear phrase that froze my blood in my veins. I couldn't understand the words, but their meaning had reached a primitive part of my brain. I see you now. The arrangements become more and more elaborate each morning. Branches and bones give way to intricate sculptures that incorporate feathers, stones, and unidentifiable organic matter. I documented everything meticulously, sent daily reports, and received increasingly delayed and dismissive responses. Management recommended wildlife cameras, which I installed, only to find them disabled every morning, memory cards wiped clean. The dreams, when they came, were of pale figures standing motionless at the foot of my bed or leaning against me, faces always hidden, but somehow conveying intense hunger. I started using stimulants to stay awake during my shift. Caffeine pills wash my throat with warm coffee. Week 3 brings the escalation. Icons now cover entire sections of the forest. Every tree within a 100-yard radius was marked with the same intricate pattern. The night recordings captured not just a whisper, but a hum that seemed to come from the earth. And the figure, the pale follower, grew bolder and bolder, appearing again and again during my patrols, each time looking closer than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was testing my boundaries, learning my habits, my reactions. My supervisor suggested it might have been a local playing an elaborate prank. When I showed him the recordings, he claimed to hear nothing unusual. Frustration tightens my chest like a vice. Even Martinez, previously sympathetic, began avoiding my eyes during the handover. I installed additional locks on my cabin door. I lined the windows with salt, an old superstition from my grandmother. I kept a hunting knife under my pillow and a heavy flashlight in my arms. None of that helped with the feeling of being constantly observed, even inside my supposed sanctuary. My mouth remains constantly dry no matter how much water I drink. My hand developed a persistent tremor that made simple tasks difficult. The night everything changed. I was halfway through my patrol route when all the sounds in the forest stopped simultaneously. The sudden silence stabbed like a physical blow, disorienting in its completeness. Even the persistent autumn wind died down, leaving the trees motionless, expectant. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. The darkness pressed against my eyes like a living thing. I fumbled for my spare light, my fingers clumsy with fear. Before I could activate it, I felt rather than heard movement behind me, a shift in the air, a subtle shift in weight on the forest floor. My muscles locked in primal terror. The fight or flight response is dwarfed by the overwhelming certainty that spinning out means death. The whispers appeared directly in my ear, no longer requiring a recording. The language remained incomprehensible, but the intention behind the sounds reached me clearly. A series of promises, an invitation, a claim is staked. My consciousness began to fray at the edges, the world dissolving into static and darkness. I don't remember running. I don't remember my cabin. My next clear memory is of the sun rising. On the floor around the bed is a perfect circle of that arrangement. Branches, bones, rocks and feathers, but this time incorporating pieces of fabric I recognized from my own uniform. I called in sick for the first time in 11 years. I spent my days obsessively searching for meaning in the symbols, for any records of similar occurrences. Local indigenous folklore spoke of forest spirits testing the resolve of those entering their domain, but nothing matched what I was experiencing. It was in an obscure academic journal that I found something really relevant. A case study from 1978 documents similar phenomena among a forestry worker in northern Michigan. The article includes rough sketches of icons that are identical to mine. The worker was found wandering from his post, severely dehydrated and suffering from acute psychosis. He spoke only in fragments of language that no linguist could identify and died 3 days later of what doctors called a sudden and catastrophic organ failure. My stomach clenched as I read the last paragraph, which mentioned a workers' magazine that contained repeated references to blandishment and proclamation etiquette. That night, I broke protocol. I set up my phone to record the entire night from multiple angles. Then I waited, knife in hand, back against the furthest wall. The whispers began at midnight, seeping through the walls as if the cabin itself were speaking. My recording device malfunctioned, the battery drained immediately. The temperature plummeted until my breath blurred before my eyes. Outside, something circled the cabin slowly, deliberately, its footsteps heavy but precise. At 3:17 a.m., every arrangement I had swept away over the past weeks appeared simultaneously inside the cabin, materializing like time-lapse photography. They formed a path from the door to where I stood. The door handle turned slowly, many locks disengaged with each soft click. I held out the knife as the door opened, revealing nothing but darkness. A deeper and more absolute darkness than the night should allow. From inside that gap, a pale figure appeared, opening the door as something was born. It's higher than possible. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles. Its face remained in shadow despite the proximity. My knife clanged against the floor, my feet gave way. I pressed against the wall, a whimper escaping my throat as the figure took an impossible step, crossing the threshold into my final sanctuary. Although I still can't understand the language. Images flooded my mind. Ancient forests are untouched by human hands. Rituals were performed under the moonlight by people who had long since turned to dust. The same pale figure tracks from the trees over the centuries. And most disturbingly myself, seen through eyes not my own, observed, judged and ultimately chosen. I get it, this isn't random. I didn't stumble across something by chance. It has been waiting, watching all the years I have worked in these forests, taking its time. The symbols are not warnings, but preparations. The agreements are not threats, but components of a larger undertaking. These whispers are not meant to frighten me, but to acclimatize me to hear them. The realization brought no greater comfort or fear, just an eerie clarity. I was chosen for something. The rite of declaration, the journal called it. When this figure reached me with its incredibly long fingers, time seemed to stop. In that moment of suspension, I made a choice not of courage, but of the sudden understanding that I had always belonged to these forests, far more than to the world of men. I raised my hand to meet its grasp. The morning found me walking the forest paths, not physically changed, but fundamentally changed. The symbols are still on the tree, but now I understand what they mean. Boundary markers, signposts, a language older than human speech. The arrangements still appear outside my cabin every dawn, but I recognize them as services, acknowledgments, steps in an ongoing process. I continued to patrol every night. I submitted my report. I maintain an appearance of normalcy during shift changes. Martinez stopped caring and started avoiding me completely. I don't blame her. Something in my eyes changed. I took a quick look in the mirror and there was still a pond. The recordings now only capture forest sounds. No whispers, no footsteps. I don't need technology to hear what's spoken directly into my mind. The pale figure walked with me now instead of watching from afar, teaching me things that no human was meant to know, showing me paths through the forest that didn't exist before. I understand that I am becoming something different than what I was. The process is gradual but irreversible. Soon I will leave behind my own symbols for the next guardian to find. I would stand motionless among the trees watching. I will whisper in a language older than time. And perhaps, if they were worthy, if they belonged in the forest like I did, they too would be chosen. Until then, I walk my path. I tend to my wood. The forest always needs protectors. Now I understand why. From the moment I set foot in the isolated Italian village, a disturbing heaviness seemed to settle between my shoulders. The air feels charged, as if infused with whispered secrets by the ancient stone houses pressing against each other. A faint breeze whistled in the cracks of the walls, and I could have sworn it carried the echo of a sigh, something strangely forlorn and charged. My heart pounded with an incomprehensible rhythm, and I felt a sudden dryness in my mouth, like I had swallowed some dust. There, the line between sanity and impossibility would begin to blur as the silent gloom of the house revealed a bizarre manipulation of gravity that threatened my understanding of reality. The house I rented was rumored to have once belonged to an astronomer haunted by forces invisible to the naked eye. I've seen photos online, of tall, narrow windows, thick stone walls that keep out any noise, and a small tower said to have once held a rudimentary telescope. However, as soon as I arrived, something in the atmosphere weighed on me. I still remember how my hands trembled the first time I gripped the doorknob. It spun with a harsh hiss, releasing the smell of damp stone and old wood. My head spun, my breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was just the fatigue of traveling and the echoing silence of a strange home. The hallway stretched out before me, lit by a single weak bulb that spilled out into the dense darkness. But some strange magnetism attracted me even more. I soon discovered the upstairs bedroom just below the old observation tower. It's quite modest. A single wooden bed, a wardrobe with faded handles and a small rectangular window provide a view of the main square. The bed's mattress sags in the middle. The sheets smelled faintly of stale air, but I felt strange staying there. Perhaps partly because I had heard rumors of storms in this area bringing with them special atmospheric disturbances. That first night, when I lay down, the house was strangely silent. Even the hum that old houses often make seemed subdued, like it's holding its breath. My pulse is a-throbbing in my temples, and my skin is covered in cold sweat. Although I didn't feel hot, I drifted into a light, agitated sleep. At some point, I felt pressure in my shoulders, a feeling so sharp that it jolted me awake. It felt like a firm hand had pushed me down onto the mattress. My heart pounded against my chest. I opened my eyes in the darkness, unable to see anything except the vague outline of the ceiling. Adrenaline rushed through my veins, my breathing ragged and too loud in my ears. The pressure disappears as suddenly as it appeared. I rubbed my eyes, trying to calm the pounding in my chest. In the morning, I told myself it was a dream. I wandered the house, looking for any signs of intruders. Each step repeats on the stone floor. Finally, I found a stack of ancient documents in a room that I assumed was once a study. The pages were torn, yellowed with age, scrawled in thick, spidery handwriting that I recognized as Latin. My knowledge of the language is minimal, but I can decipher a few phrases referring to astronomical forces and gravity manipulation. The name of the astronomer, Victoria Benedetti, is repeated frequently. I spent the next few days trying to figure it out. I wrote for hours in my temporary study, but my concentration kept slipping. My nerves refused to settle, like 1,000 insects crawling right under my skin. I often hear a weak noise late at night. And once while walking through the living room, I felt a subtle lift in my body, as if my next step was lighter than it should have been. For a brief moment, my stomach lurched like an elevator descending so quickly. My heart was beating so hard that I had to steady myself against the wall. The other day, I watched a pen roll off the table. Instead of bouncing and settling under the seat, it wobbled once on the wooden planks, then hovered a few inches above the ground before releasing. My arms erupted in goosebumps, and a distinctive ringing filled my ears. I blinked several times as if my eyes might have played a trick on me. But deep inside, I knew that I had just witnessed a physical violation. Towards the end of the week, the strangest event happened. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of deep thunder. Rain pounded on the window. A howling wind pressed against the wall and sporadic lightning flashes illuminated the bedroom. I felt a violent vibration in the air. Something pricked my skin. All at once, I realized that some of my belongings had floated off the table. A small notebook, a water bottle, even a pen. They float as if suspended in thick liquid, rising slowly, then floating down. My jaw clenched so tight I could feel my teeth grinding. For a moment, I simply stared in shock, sweat hitting my forehead. Then, with a pulse of lightning, everything fell to the floor, leaving me shaking in a terror. My pulse runs very fast. I retreated to the corner of the room, unable to tear my eyes away from the distractions. The rain pounded the roof, and with each flash of light, I felt the room tilt to one side. The door rattled, and I felt like an unimaginable force was turning the house inside out. Each inhale felt tight and forced, my lungs struggling to fill with air that seemed electrifying. I didn't sleep again that night. I just sat there with my back pressed against the wall, drenched in cold sweat, watching and waiting for the next impossible arrival. A few days later, I discovered many articles hidden in a small chest. These pages speak clearly about Benedetti's experiments. He dissected mathematical theorems, scrolled star diagrams, and recorded what looked like instructions for ceremonial procedures. Several lines refer to the power of the earth with the celestial sphere. Another mentioned the reversal of natural laws during storms, and there were repeated references to the invisible hand. One note mentioned that the gravitational anomalies are strongest in that house and lightning seems to trigger them. I felt a deep relaxation while reading it, as if my own blood had turned to ice. My body trembled and I realized my breathing was very shallow. Anxiety nagged at me, telling me that maybe I should leave. But a strange passion forced me to stay there. My sense of time became increasingly distorted. The gloom was constant, and I found myself looking out the narrow windows at the villagers outside. They went about their days under rain and low skies. I tried to talk to a local in a small cafe about the weather, but he just lowered his eyes, whispering that during storms, the old house has its peculiarities. I recall his voice almost unrecognizable, as if there were better things left unsaid. The conversation left me with a crawling feeling down my spine, my stomach twisting. My heart wobbles. The lights flickered, and I realized they were throwing strange twisted shadows on the wall, as if something were warping the angle of the light. The house seemed to groan. The beam above screamed as if it could split into two. A rush of nervous energy pushed me out of my chair. I stumbled, almost losing my balance as the floor felt like it tilted under my feet. My breathing was ragged and my head was pounding with fear. That's when I noticed water dripping from the kitchen faucet, but not going down. Water droplets slid up the ceiling. I stood there, mouth parted, unable to form a coherent thought. Sweat moistened the back of my neck. My mind races, searching for rational explanations that won't come. Water collected in a shimmering pool on the ceiling, defying every natural law I knew. Suddenly, the lights blinked. Darkness filled the house. My breath roared in my ears. The house wonders as if it were alive and reacting to the electricity of the storm. Thunder cracked so close it shook the windows. Without a conscious decision, I found myself scrambling up the stairs, clinging to the rails as the steps seemed to shift beneath my feet. My whole body felt shaky and weak. I was drenched in sweat and my mouth was dry from fear. Reaching the top, I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Lightning illuminates the hallway, revealing that the door to the bedroom is ajar. Inside, I glimpsed something that shook my heart with raw horror. The bed is pinned to the ceiling. Or more accurately, it seems like the ceiling has become the floor for some furniture. I can't forget how my hands trembled, my breathing hurt in my chest. Another bolt of lightning lit the space, and I realized that I too had my feet on the ceiling. It took a second for my brain to register the impossibility. My vantage point was reversed. My insides twisted. I felt disoriented, as if trapped in a nightmare. I tried to step forward only to stagger to the side. The whole world had turned upside down, but my mind kept screaming that this couldn't be happening. A deep thrumming sound flowed through the walls. My vision blurred for a moment and my stomach confused the force of nausea. I fell, landing hard on the actual floor with a thud that rattled my teeth. Every muscle in my body spasmed, and I let out a sharp animal grunt. My heart was pounding so hard I could have sworn it echoed in the hallway. The bed collapsed, attacking violently. Objects scattered in all directions, and the floor panels vibrated as if in protest. A primal fear took hold. I thought about abandoning the house right then and there, but the fierce storm gave the idea of running blindly into the terrible night. I crouched in a corner, panting. The sour taste of panic was thick in my mouth. My vision came out with black dots from the panting. My mind teetered on the edge of disbelief and terror, replaying those inverted moments over and over again. Hours could have passed in that dark corner. At some point, the storm started to get unsuitable, and the house still grew back. Over the following days, I tried to make sense of it all. The documents I have found suggest that Benedetti discovered a way to create gravity, enabled by storm's electrical charges. I feel convinced that his experiments have left their mark on the very structure of the house. Paranoia makes me miserable. I have second-adjusted each of my steps. Whenever a breeze shakes the shutters, my heart jumps. If a shadow flickered across the walls, sweat broke out on my forehead and I whipped around, my lungs tight with fear. There are moments when I can't believe the simplest feelings. If I put a cup on the table and heard it clink, I expected it to float away or hit the ceiling. My sleep has become a twisted battlefield of half-formed nightmares. I wake up to the slightest sound, my skin, my ears ringing, the taste of bile at the back of my throat. The feeling of being stalked by forces that do not recognize the rules of nature. I saw shadows moving where there were no people. I felt a presence behind me in the hallway as if invisible hands were reaching out close enough to nibble my skin. Sometimes I tell myself that these are panic hallucinations. But deep down I believe the house is reacting to my fear, eating it out, twisting it into sharper claws. One stormy afternoon, the looming sense of danger becomes too much to bear. I felt the walls closing in, and I swore I could hear the equations whispering in the wind. My clothes clung to my sweating body, and my pulse pounded against my skull. I walked the living room in a state of mounting excitement. Anxiety curled in my gut like a venomous snake. As thunder shook the foundation, I let out an unsteady breath and made the decision to leave. I stuffed some belongings into a bag, took my keys and opened the door. The rain hit my face, but I barely felt it. I ran down the steep path, my skin giving me the crazy feeling that gravity could reverse at any moment. At the edge of the village, I glanced back at that old house. Lightning silhouetted of old observation towers. And immediately, the whole structure looked like it was bending on itself, as if drawn by a powerful void from above. My heart thundered, and goosebumps rippled across my arms. I felt dizzy, almost compelled to watch, but the terror drove me onwards. I slipped into the safety of a small inn on the far side of the village and huddled there, breathing short, irregular, teeth dull from more than the cold. The favorite, noticing my ashen face, asked if I was okay. The innkeeper's expression told me he had heard it before. However, he offered no solution, only a solemn shake of his head. Even if my manuscript remained unfinished, even if my belongings were scattered across the floor and ceiling, I couldn't risk another night there. I felt a constant tremor in my hands, and my lungs remained restricted with the fear of suffocation. Yet as I sit here recounting these events, I am left with one lingering, disturbing question. That uncertainty gnaws at me even as I keep a single lamp lit through each dark hour. Sleep comes accordingly, if at all. Every thunderclap takes me back to that lonely bedroom, pinned to the ceiling, praying for a world that still stands upright. Even though I ran away from the house, its mark remains. My night was plagued by images of objects floating in silent defiance, by a suffocating tension that wrapped around my chest until I breathed the door. And the worst part is not knowing if I will escape well. Because sometimes I catch the reflection of a door or a chair in the corner of my eye. And for a second, it seemed to hover at the edge of vision, just inches above the ground, suspended there by a force older than reason. Every storm that passes overhead causes a pounding in my throat. A cold sweat caressed my palm. It was an unclear thought that in the next moment, I could find myself once again walking on the ceiling, helpless and consumed by the impossible. Perhaps that is Benedetti's ultimate legacy, an enduring terror that logic cannot dispel, that makes me question every breath, every step, every beat of my racing heart. I still remember how my heart pounded the first time I realized something was wrong with that old radio. It was late at night and a sickly orange light poured through the cracks in my dusty curtains, casting distorted shadows on the walls. The air was uncomfortably still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. 1 hour 6 minutes and 53 seconds, I was sitting at my desk tinkering with a small circuit board when I heard static coming from the corner of the living room. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But then it came again, clear and crackling and all very real. I bought the radio at an estate sale a few weeks ago, attracted by its classic design. Its glossy wooden case reminds me of something out of an old family photo. And as an electrical engineer, I've always been fascinated by old technology. I originally planned to restore it as a personal project, maybe replace some tubes, fix the dial, and see if I could get it to run on modern power. I didn't anticipate it would power on by itself, and I certainly didn't expect the warnings, the strange voices, and the overwhelming feeling that I was no longer alone in my own home. The first real sign that something was wrong happened the day after I brought it in. I was in the basement testing a new amplifier design and I heard music drifting faintly down the stairs. It sounded like an old swing tune coming from the living room. Naturally, I assumed I'd just plugged in the radio. But when I went upstairs, the radio actually turned off. There are no lights on the dashboard, no glow tubes inside, nothing. However, I'm sure I heard it. My skin tingled and chills ran down my spine when I realized the radio wasn't even connected to an outlet. Brushing off the incident as an echo from somewhere else in the neighborhood, I decided not to mention it again. Over the next few days, small disturbances began to pile up. I was reading a book on the couch and felt the temperature suddenly drop behind me, as if there was a cold wind blowing past. The lights would flicker, even though the wiring in my house was fine. The door will make small creaking sounds when no one touches it. My heart pounded whenever these things happened, and I unconsciously held my breath. There's always the uncomfortable feeling that there's something stuck in the corner of my eye. But the radio was the focus of my growing unease. Every time I passed by, a low hum would tickle my ears, too faint to be absolutely certain, but enough to give me goosebumps. I tried intentionally turning it on one afternoon to see if I could reproduce the bizarre flickering behavior. The watch face lit up, switching to a station that played static and occasional snippets of old broadcasts. Nothing was too unusual until the voices started ringing out. "It's just a paragraph in a sentence. Something about being careful," said in a deep voice that echoed through the speakers. My throat was dry and I felt nervous butterflies in my stomach. I couldn't tell if it was a signal from some distant station or if it was coming from some strange place. That night, I unplugged the radio again and placed a small tape recorder next to it, hoping to capture any random sounds. However, when I checked the recorder the next morning, the device's battery was completely drained. 1 hour 9 minutes and 42 seconds, this is the same recorder that I had fully charged an hour before putting it down. Annoyed but curious, I replaced the battery and tried again, but after less than 5 minutes, the replacement battery was dead. My palms started sweating when I realized something was interfering with my device. As a lifelong skeptic, I have tried to approach the problem systematically. 1 hour 10 minutes and 5 seconds, I want a reasonable explanation. Faulty wiring, electromagnetic interference, can short-circuit causing battery drain. But the more I tested, the less it made sense. I used my multimeter to check for current leaks. Everything is normal. I took the radio apart only to find the parts worn but intact, as if they were quietly waiting to be powered up. There is nothing inside the housing that indicates an obvious mechanical failure that could cause spontaneous activation. However, every time I touched the wooden frame of the radio, a slight shiver ran through my arm, as if I were touching an electric wire. Then there are the warnings. They are faint at first, like garbled static snippets shaping themselves into speech. Late one evening, I heard it working again on its own. I was in the kitchen checking my messages at the time. When I heard that hissing and cracking sound, I rushed into the living room. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat and my hands began to shake. Leaning back, I heard a sound like an urgent plea. Something about not letting it go. It was muffled, but the underlying desperation in that voice made my scalp prickle. I tried to record again, but this time, my phone battery drained from 80% in just a few seconds. My temples ached with disappointment and a rising sense of fear. The more the radio plays, the more strange things happen around the house. The lights in the hallway began flashing in Morse code. The living room windows would rattle even on a quiet night. I heard echoes of conversations that seemed to come from rooms I wasn't in. But whenever I checked, those rooms were empty. Sometimes it sounded like 2 or 3 people were whispering urgently, although I could never hear exactly what they were saying. On a particularly unpleasant night, I heard a conversation drifting from the radio that seemed to originate from my own bedroom. The voices sounded muffled, distant, as if transmitted through layers of static electricity. I heard them discussing their presence in the house. They mentioned my name but their tone was frantic, as if they were trapped. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel my pulse pulsing through my teeth. I ran upstairs, half expecting to catch the intruder, but the bedroom was dark and empty, except for the outline of my bed looming in the darkness. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My breathing became shallow and ragged and cold sweat ran down my forehead. My attempts to ignore these events only made them stronger. Something was trying to warn me, or perhaps trying to lure me deeper into this mystery. I find myself avoiding the living room at night. The radio's presence in the darkness felt like a threat. While I have no evidence of anything malicious, just a sneaking feeling that it's more than just an old piece of technology. My dreams became restless. 1 hour 13 minutes and 2 seconds, I woke up drenched in sweat, convinced I heard faint whispers from behind the wall. The shadows in my peripheral vision took the form of tall figures in the corners, disappearing as soon as I turned my head. My appetite gradually decreased and I found myself skipping meals because my stomach was constantly in knots. Every time I try to approach a situation rationally, some new inexplicable event destroys my rational framework. One morning, I heard a slight noise from the attic. It sounded like light footsteps walking in a tight circle. I've never stored much there, just a few boxes of old electronics. As I climbed the creaky stairs, fear made my legs tremble. Each step was like a drum beating against my chest. At the top, I turned on the flashlight. The rays of light revealed dusty wooden slats and scattered cobwebs. The space was empty, but I felt a pressure in the air like static electricity on my skin, making every hair on my body stand on end. My flashlight flashes twice and then turns off even though it has new batteries. In that moment, something touched my shoulder. A cold electric shock made me stumble back, almost losing my balance on the narrow stairs. Returning downstairs, I grabbed the radio and placed it on my desk, determined to disassemble every last part. My hands shook as I removed the back panel. The tubes are mostly original. The circuit looks old but still works well. There is something sparkling in the corner of the box. It was a piece of metal engraved with symbols I didn't recognize. The strange words made my pulse pound. I tried to spit it out but my vision blurred and a wave of nausea washed over me. I sat down on the floor, panting, my ears ringing as if I had just been exposed to an extremely strong frequency. When the dizziness passed, I realized I was drenched in cold sweat. That piece of metal was nowhere to be found. I could have sworn I had seen its icons before. Yet there I was, alone in the workshop, feeling as if I had lost track of time. I began to suspect that the radio wasn't just broken. It felt as if it held something, a presence, an energy, maybe even something sentient. Every logical part of my being objected to the idea, but my experiences were too consistent to refute. I tried confiding in a friend over the phone, describing the static, the drained battery, the scary voices. He thought I was just stressed from work, or perhaps lonely. He said I should leave the house for a while. I realized that was probably a good idea, but there was an invisible string tying me to the radio. I couldn't leave home, and I couldn't leave that thing unobserved. In the days that followed, the messages on the radio became clearer and clearer. Late at night, I heard someone or something uttering words about darkness pouring in, about an open door. His voice was labored, as if he was trying hard to speak through many layers of noise. The correlation between the radio warnings and the events happening in my house became impossible to ignore. 1 hour 16 minutes and 13 seconds, right after the radio blared a warning about not letting it grow stronger, the light in my bedroom flashed and then went out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to faint. I began to carefully check the door locks, turn on the lights and meticulously check every corner of the house. My nerves were frayed and my paranoia grew. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear faint breathing near the bedroom door. Other times, I feel a cold pressure in my chest as I try to fall asleep, as if someone is leaning on me. Every sound, every flash of light felt like the house was teasing me. An unshakable fear rose in my stomach, as if something was about to happen horribly wrong. In a desperate attempt to regain control, I set up a new recorder with an external power source that theoretically could not be drained so easily. I placed it near the radio and waited until the next time it flared up. Sure enough, around midnight, the speakers emitted a crackling sound, followed by persistent whispers. Mustering all my courage, I sat there, refusing to move. My heart pounded hard at the blow. Sweat dripped down the back of my neck and my hands went numb. The whispers continued for a moment, then gradually increased in volume until they were almost deafening. Suddenly, the light above emitted a series of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. My breathing became rapid and shallow, panic clawing at my throat. I tried turning on the flashlight but it wouldn't turn on. Trying to fight with trembling fingers, I groped for my phone that still had a full battery in the evening. Die. The invisible pressure in the air increased like a wave of static electricity that set my nerves on fire. Then, just as suddenly, the whispers stopped. The radio became silent. In that nauseating silence, I felt a huge presence in the room, as if I was no longer the only occupant. My skin prickled with the certain feeling that something was standing right behind me, invisible but undeniably there. I turned around slowly, my limbs shaking as if each one weighed 100 pounds. Darkness prevailed, but a faint shape seemed to loom just outside my vision. My senses were reeling, my mind trying to process the impossible. Every breath felt like shards of glass scraping against my throat. I couldn't think, couldn't move. I was paralyzed by pure terror. Then, in a rush of adrenaline, I rushed to the circuit breaker, flipping each switch, trying to flood the house with light. When he returned, the living room looked the same as always, except for the broken glass from the overhead light bulb. The radio sat there, taunting me with its silence. I've had enough. The next morning, I decided to remove this evil device from my home once and for all. But as I was about to end it, a final burst of static came from the speakers. My eyes glanced at the dial. They glowed faintly, even though the radio was unplugged. A voice that was calm, deliberate, and strangely familiar, delivered the final cryptic statement. It says something about a presence that is bound to the place and not the object. My whole body felt cold as I realized that removing the radio might not solve anything. That last message served as a warning and grim confirmation that whatever I had awakened had originated in the house itself. For a moment, I considered calling someone to level the place, or at least hiring an investigation team to check for electromagnetic anomalies. But part of me knows that no conventional approach can dislodge this insidious force. Instead, I gathered my tools and prepared to confront it. I wrapped the radio in thick plastic and locked it in a closet in the basement, sealing it shut. The air was still heavy and I could feel the energy in the house undiminished. That night, I paced the hallway, turning the lights on and off, waiting for presence. Strangely, that never happened. The claustrophobic feeling is still there, but it seems distracted, if such a thing is possible. Tension lingers in every corner. The next morning, I woke up with a strange peace in my chest, as if a storm had passed but left behind a bruised and uneasy sky. The radio remained silent in its makeshift tomb. Yet I couldn't shake the idea that something was still there, watching and waiting. A strange obsession began to take over my mind. I decided to leave the house for a few weeks, pluck up courage and consult some references about hauntings, or at least talk to more experienced engineers who have solved unexplained electromagnetic problems. Before leaving, I stood in the living room one last time, feeling the thick silence weigh on me. Every fiber of my being urged me to run, to escape the invisible darkness that seemed to have seeped into the walls. As I locked the front door, I glanced back through the window. My eyes turned to where the radio used to be. The living room was bathed in the dim light of the rising sun. The mote of dust swirled lazily in the air and for a second I swore I saw a shadow flit across the space. My throat tightened and I felt chills again. No sighed in. However, the unmistakable impression of a shape remained, clearly visible in the dim light. I left anyway, unsure of what I had actually experienced. I'm still not sure. Maybe it's all just a trick of stress and isolation. Or maybe I really have encountered something that goes beyond reasonable explanation. Even now, I still feel an uncomfortable heaviness in my chest every time I think about that house. Whatever was lurking there, it eased my fears, gradually revealing themselves through the noise of the walkie-talkie. And even though I'm so far away now, I still sometimes hear a faint crackling sound in the silence, like a distant radio station. It made my heart pound and my stomach churn. In those moments, I wondered if my attempts to stop the radio were futile, if that presence somehow clung to me. I don't know if it can be defeated, banished, or explained scientifically. But its warning remains etched in my memory, that it is tied to the place, not the object. That house may be forever haunted by its evil occupant. My only consolation is that I escaped before it could fully manifest. However, the question that keeps me up at night is whether we can really escape something like that. Or if it finds new ways to spy on us, whispering through wires and frequencies we can't understand. Fear lingered in every quiet moment, every flicker of electricity, reminding me that some presence was simply waiting in silence until they decided to speak again. The hallway light flickered the moment I took off that tattered coat, as if the building itself had sensed an intrusion from another era. I remember the peculiar silence that filled the hallway at that moment. A silence that was thick and unnatural, as if the air was watching me. There was an inexplicable feeling of dread in my chest, as if I had opened a portal to something that should have been sealed. My pulse pounded in my ears and a strange feeling of tension stretched across my shoulders, urging me to toss the clothes aside. I can't say why, but from the first moment I saw it, I had an instinctive feeling that it did not belong to me or any living person for that matter. I'm a literature professor, someone who makes a living analyzing the nuances of novels and poetry. My world has always been defined by clear, well-organized thoughts, by logical interpretations of texts, and by a clear delineation between fact and fiction. But ever since I put that classic coat on my shoulders, my understanding of reality has begun to fade. This story sounds like the ramblings of someone on the verge of madness. As soon as I put that jacket on, strange things started happening. I felt my body become heavier, as if every step I took was being pulled down by an invisible force. The jacket is not just fabric but like a living thing, permeating my body little by little. My hands began to feel cold, as if I could no longer control myself. The light in the room began to flicker irregularly, and I felt an invisible presence following my every move. In the dark night, I stood in front of the mirror, looked at my reflection and couldn't recognize myself anymore. My face was blurred, not because of darkness, but because of a feeling like I had become part of something else, a shadow drifting through time and space. I left the house with an indescribable feeling, but not long after, I realized that, even when I left, that presence was still watching me, silently, from somewhere beyond this world. Maybe that's exactly it. Yet I feel compelled to say it, if only to escape the growing feeling that my thoughts are no longer entirely my own. I first bought this jacket at a small antique store near the university campus. The store is one of those cramped, dimly lit places, filled with relics from centuries past. Normally, I don't bother with clothes from thrift stores, but something caught my eye at the faded olive green clothes hanging in the corner. The owner, an older man with a distant expression, told me the jacket once belonged to someone famous. He didn't say much, but when he showed it, there was a strange glint in his eyes. I felt a slight shiver as I put it on, but I assumed the jacket was just cold to the touch. Only later did I begin to suspect that it was not the cold of the fabric but the cold of some invisible presence clinging to it. At first, wearing the jacket felt strangely empowering. The thick wool draped over my shoulders like a regal cloak, creating a faint but noticeable change in my posture. I found myself walking more confidently, almost strutting through the hallways of the university. Colleagues commented that I seemed more energetic. Some people even asked me if I exercise or take new vitamins because I stand taller and speak more firmly. My heart suddenly trembled with an unfamiliar excitement. It was thrilling to have my colleagues see me in a new light. Then the nightmares began. At first they were fleeting. Vague glimmers of an earlier era. The streets are lit by gas lamps. People wear clothes from the turn of the century. Horse-drawn carriages rumble along the cobblestone streets. In my dreams, I was always an influential person, someone with weight in that old society. I felt recognized and revered in a disturbing way. Yet there is a grayness to these images, a patch of color that suggests something grim is lurking around the edges. Every time I wake up, my mouth is dry, my heart is beating like a drum in my chest, and the bed sheets are wrapped around me as if I've been wrestling with them all night. The next morning, As I slipped my arms into the sleeves of my coat, it felt like a hug from someone who wanted me back in those dreams. Strange objects began to appear in his coat pocket. The first discovery was a small envelope sealed with old-fashioned wax, inside which I found a crisp piece of parchment. The text is almost illegible, written in an ancient calligraphy style. My hands shook as I tried to decipher it. The words that jumped out were references to bondage, oaths, and inheritance. I felt cold sweat running down my forehead as I realized I recognized the scenario from my nightmares. My rational mind kept trying to tell me that it was nothing more than a leftover from an antique store, but my deeper intuition hissed that something more sinister was going on. I tried to ignore these signs, but every time I put on the jacket, a strange feeling filled my body. It felt like I was entering a world that wasn't mine, like a part of my soul was being absorbed, replaced by something older, darker. Even though I tried to understand the reason behind the nightmares, when I looked at the coat, I couldn't help but feel that I was awakening something powerful, dark, and capable of controlling my life. Sometimes I feel like the coat itself is the center of all the mystery. And as I looked at the symbols on that crisp piece of parchment, a strange thought crossed my mind: did I really own the coat, or did the coat own me? As the psychological disintegration began, I couldn't help but wonder, was I becoming part of another story, one I had no desire to be a part of? A few days later, I discovered an ornate pocket watch in tarnished silver, its case engraved with swirling patterns. When I touched its surface, my chest tightened. The feeling of déjà vu was so strong that I stumbled backwards. It's like I've held that watch 1,000 times before, even though I know I haven't. I have tried to rationalize these findings. Perhaps the store owner forgot to empty the bag. Perhaps these items were created as a marketing ploy to enhance the mystique of the jacket. But then the biggest shock came. I started having memories that didn't belong to me. It will occur in short bursts, always triggered by seemingly random stimuli. When standing by the office window, looking at the modern campus, my mind suddenly replaced that scene with the view of an old yard. Huge arches, marble columns, stone walkways leading to large mahogany doors. I could feel the cool breeze on my skin, smell the distant scent of burning coal, and hear the sound of horse hooves clicking on cobblestones. My heart was pounding, my breathing became rapid, sweat trickled down the back of my neck. As the image faded, I trembled, not knowing if I was hallucinating or simply daydreaming. However, there's no denying it feels very real. Soon, colleagues and friends began to notice subtle changes in my behavior. One evening, I organized a small gathering at my apartment. I remember someone invited me to tea, and I responded with a different expression, an ancient expression. The group was silent. Then my best friend told me I spoke with an accent like an old European play. I brushed it off, muttering a few excuses about being immersed in research. But deep down, I felt panic rising, my chest tightening, my fingertips shaking with fear. It was as if my body was no longer completely under my own control. The reflection in the mirror begins to distort. It started like quick flashes of lightning. I caught sight of someone wearing a formal belted jacket and bow tie instead of my usual shirt. The reflection for a split second had a different hairstyle, slicked back as if from ancient times. My lungs constricted as if I had forgotten how to breathe. I clutched the edge of the sink, dizzy and disoriented. Every time I close my eyes, take a few desperate gulps of air, and when I look back, I see myself again. The professor's clothes were wrinkled, the hair was disheveled, and the coat hung on a hook behind my back, but those glimpses left a chilling horror in my mind. I couldn't escape the feeling that the jacket wasn't just affecting me, it was rewriting me. Walking through campus, I found my eyes lingering on the old architecture. Suddenly, the modern library became colorful, the neon lights of the student lounge too bright. I developed a love for candlelight, finding the fluorescent light above abrasive to my senses. Every wall in the school seemed to be vibrating with an obsession I couldn't escape. Familiar lines and details suddenly feel strange. I felt as if I was becoming part of some historical narrative that I never wanted to be a part of. An invisible force was surrounding me, enveloping me in a web that I couldn't break. My speech pattern also changed. Students looked at me quizzically when I used phrases that seemed to be taken from a historical novel. In class, my chest tightened with fear as I realized I was consulting texts that were not on any current syllabus, books that, to my knowledge, had never existed in this timeline. My heart rate skyrocketed and I could barely swallow the dry feeling in my mouth. I felt confused, but I also felt scared to see how naturally these grammatically incorrect references rolled off my tongue. The worst moments are at night. The heater in my apartment hissed and hissed, making sounds that reminded me of footsteps squeaking on old floors. I lay in bed, the blanket pulled up to my chin, my heart pounding in my chest as the wind beat against the window. Sometimes, in my half-dreams, I imagine an old Victrola playing difficult tunes from another era. My breath caught in my throat and I broke out in a cold sweat, not knowing if I was dreaming or actually hearing the faint echo of that music. The darkness poured in, thick and oppressive, making me toss and turn. My coat was draped across a nearby chair like a silent sentinel watching me. Its silhouette stood out against the moonlight and seemed alert. My sense of self continued to unravel the day I found an old photo tucked inside the inner lining of my jacket. It shows a group of people standing outside a stately turn-of-the-century building. My blood ran cold as I recognized one of the faces. It's me, but it's not me. The people in the photo have the same eyes and the same jaw. He stood proudly, wearing the same jacket I had just bought, although the outlines of his body looked a little blurred, as if time itself was trying to erase him. I felt my knees buckle and I had to sit down, gasping for air. My mind raced, trying to come up with plausible explanations, maybe a distant relative, someone with a strange appearance. However, deep down, a terrified voice whispered that this was the original owner and I would become him. I began to suspect the coat carried some sort of curse, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Many times I tried to throw it away. I stuffed it into a plastic bag, tied it tightly, and walked to the trash can behind my building, my heart pounding with every step. However, I always find a reason to come back. My chest tightened with an irrational terror, and I sweated, the jacket growing heavier in my arms. I hurried back to my apartment, overwhelmed with relief as I hung it back on the shelf. The feeling of being forced was terrifying, like something outside of my reason was controlling me. My breath caught, my heart pounded and I stood there trembling, wondering what force had affected me so. Late one evening, as I walked around my office, I felt compelled to try it again. I told myself I had to research this phenomenon to understand the harmful effects of the shirt. But as soon as I slipped my hand into its sleeve, a wave of unfamiliar memories washed over me. I saw roaring fireplaces, tasted brandy on my tongue and smelled the musty scent of old libraries. My whole body shook. My mind was a storm of images, some with exciting intensity, others with terrifying implications. My vision blurred and I stumbled. When I looked at my hands, they were momentarily covered with fine leather gloves, despite the fact that I was empty-handed. That night I had difficulty sleeping. Finally, as I dozed off, I dreamed that I was signing a ledger in that ancient script with a brush. For a surreal moment, the jacket seemed to reach out, as if fighting against the flames. I felt resistance, as if some invisible force was holding it tight, preventing the fire from consuming it. My heart pounded as I felt the gloom from the coat spread through the air, as if the cold invaded the space around me. The fire suddenly extinguished, leaving only a light smoke, like a threat lurking in the darkness. Unable to believe my eyes, I looked down, and saw that the jacket was still intact. It stood there, unburned, unharmed, as if nothing had happened. Only the feeling of tension remains, like a warning that will never stop. A cold wind swept past, making me shiver. I quickly took my coat and stuffed it back into my pocket, determined not to let it get any closer to me. However, when I turned around, I saw a figure standing in the smoke. A shadowy figure, almost unrecognizable, but with a strange sense of familiarity. My eyes were blurred with fear, and I couldn't take my eyes off that figure. At first, I thought I was just hallucinating. But when I turned to look, the figure had moved closer, as if following me. A small voice, faint from somewhere, rang out in the quiet space. The words were not in the language I knew, but a strange, distant sound, like ancient words being whispered through the wind. The voice was hypnotic, forcing me to turn around and face something I didn't want to see. I stood there, paralyzed by an indescribable fear. The space around me seemed to deform, the walls, the shadows, seemed to be moving and around me, invisible things were chasing me. The feeling of fear does not just stop at hallucinations, but it has become reality. I began to hear footsteps, light but unmistakable, as if someone was following me, entering my space, invisible but so close I could feel their breath. The cold wind continuously blew through each door, and I felt an invisible pressure covering my body. I turned around, but there was nothing but darkness, only the sound of my breathing mixed with the distant rumble of thunder. That was the moment I understood that the coat was not just an object, but a door, a threshold to another reality, where memories that did not belong to me began to swap, where not only was time being ripped apart, but I myself was gradually becoming a part of it. When the cloak is cursed, it not only haunts physical objects but also penetrates the mind, even the soul of the owner. And in the moments that followed, I was not simply facing the past, but facing myself, in an unfamiliar form that I could not escape. The wind blew strongly into my face, bringing with it a strange coldness. I stood there, in the darkness of the house I once called home, but now felt completely different. The house had changed, and I knew it had been waiting for me. The walls seemed to breathe, as if they were alive and awaiting my return. As I crossed the threshold, silence washed over me like a heavy wave. I felt everything around me warp, as if I were entering another reality. The musty smell of the air in the house reminded me of old memories, but it wasn't just the old smell of the house. It was as if the smell of things that had been forgotten, memories that had not been erased. I walked into the living room, and immediately, my eyes stopped at the armchair near the window. As I feared, the chair was still there, but there was a distinct change, a faint, fleeting silhouette as I looked, as if someone was sitting there, watching me from another world. Nothing has changed, but everything is different. The signs, the details, little by little, it was as if the house was truly alive, absorbing me, bringing me into harmony with what had passed. At that moment, a whisper rang out from the corner of the room. That's not the sound of the wind. Not the creaking wood of the house. It was a voice, faint but clear. A familiar voice, as if calling my name. I turned around, but there was no one. The room was empty, but I felt a presence. Something is waiting. My heart was pounding, as if something was standing behind me, so close that I could feel its breath. I turned around again, but there was only darkness and silence. The cold air seemed to be compressed, making me feel like I was trapped in some dimensional space, a place I couldn't escape from. After a few seconds, I returned to the bedroom where my dreams began. It feels like a gentle ghost across the room. The curtains moved slightly, and in the dim light of the bedside lamp, I saw the blurry silhouette of someone standing in the mirror. But it's not me. It was a man wearing an old coat, his eyes were dim but still visible through the darkness. Memories of the past began to flood back, images I couldn't explain, memories I didn't recognize. I tried to step closer, but when I got close to the mirror, the figure disappeared immediately, leaving me with emptiness. The whole room was silent, but I felt that presence was still somewhere, watching me. The feeling of fear is no longer a vague concept, it is a living entity in this house, and I am the one chosen to recognize it. In that eerie silence, I knew that this house had changed me, had led me into another reality, where memories that did not belong to me began to fade and I could not escape. I don't know if it's possible to leave and escape it, or if I'm just a part of it forever. But one thing I know for sure is, that house will never leave me alone. And when I left the house for the last time, I noticed something strange. The memories of the coat, of its former owner, are not just a part of the past. It was a part of me, ingrained in my mind. Every time I look in the mirror, I still see that shadow, the shadow of a life that has lived and will live again through me. I climbed each worn wooden staircase, each step a reminder of the oldness of this house. The air seemed thick, heavy, as if I was intruding into a space where I shouldn't be. The hissing sounds from the stairs mixed with the cold wind from the gap in the wall. The attic was not only cold but also so dark that I had to squint to see the forgotten items clearly. Boxes of old things piled up, invisible items swallowed by time, but I sensed something strange, from those dark corners. Suddenly, something stirred in the darkness. I was stunned, stopped, my breathing quickened, my hands shaking as I tried to identify the noise. A wooden door in the distance opened slightly, even though no one was touching it. A cold wind blew past, carrying a damp smell, as if the air had been trapped in crevices for centuries. The quiet feeling of the house suddenly changed. It was as if someone was watching, from behind an open door, from the shadows that had long reigned in this space. I walked towards the door, my hands sweating, each step seemed to lead me into another world, a space outside of time. The door opened just when I was almost there. And after pushing gently, I realized that inside was not the attic room I remembered. It was empty, apart from the rough walls, there was only one thing lying on the floor, an old armchair. But this chair is no ordinary item. The ropes stick tightly to the handrail, forming a strange texture. It looked as if it had been used to bind something, or someone. My heart pounded, and I felt fear spread through every fiber of my being. A faint image appeared in my head. I remembered this chair, not from before, but from a time I couldn't explain. It's a picture of me sitting in this chair, there's another person in the room with me. A long shadow was looking at me, but I couldn't remember its face clearly. Only eyes shining in the darkness, full of hatred. I couldn't shake the feeling that this chair, like everything in the house, had a strong connection to something I couldn't remember. The shadows were approaching me, about to reach out from the darkness, drawing me into another world. I know, if I don't get out, I will become a part of it, a part of the shadow that the house has swallowed for generations. Cold sweat broke out all over my body, my hands clenched into fists. The urge to turn around and close the door grew stronger, but I couldn't let this image go. I stood there, just one more step away from leaving everything behind. But there was something in this house that was waiting for me, and I knew I couldn't run away forever. From somewhere behind me, a soft voice rang out. I couldn't recognize every single word, but the truth of it was slowly sinking into me. Those words could all be a warning, a reminder that I hadn't really left this house. The pieces of my memories are still here, and they will never let me go. A cold wind blew, sweeping away all the remaining pieces of memory, and I knew, whether I wanted it or not, I was here forever. I couldn't shake the feeling that surrounded me. Reading those lines, I felt like I was entering an irreversible process. The memories of the previous people were starting to creep into me, and I felt as if I was slowly losing control. A bunch of old memories, melodies, sounds, vague images. It all seemed to be pouring towards me, from inside this house, from the deserted rooms. I shivered, a cold feeling running down my spine. At that moment, the light from my phone flickered again, the screen lit up and then dimmed, as if it was struggling with something invisible. Each time, my heart skipped a beat, the feeling of being watched became stronger and stronger. It was as if this house could hear me, understand my fear, and was responding with mysterious signs. I sat down, sweat soaking the back of my shirt. Tried to breathe deeply, but each inhale was choking, as if the air in this room had changed. I looked around, but didn't see anything. Everything was still quiet, too quiet. The strange noises had started again, as if they were coming from all directions, from the walls, from objects in the room. Maybe they've been there the whole time, waiting for me to acknowledge them. Suddenly, a soft hiss rang out from a dark corner of the room. I turned around, but saw only pitch darkness, nothing moving. However, an invisible feeling was filling the air, as if I was no longer alone in this room. Something is waiting, and it's getting closer. I can feel its breath in the air. In that moment, I noticed something strange. The old chair I had left near my desk was moving. It didn't move on its own, but it was as if some invisible force was acting on it, causing it to lean towards me. The chair's legs creaked, as if someone was sitting in it, slowly pulling it closer to me. I couldn't take my eyes off it, my palms were sweaty. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run away, but my legs couldn't move. I felt trapped in this very house, drawn by an inexplicable force. At this moment, I realized that this house is not just a place to live, it is a trap. An elaborate trap, where everything was arranged to make me believe that I could leave, when in fact I was trapped, along with the memories and silhouettes of the former residents. The chair stopped suddenly, and I saw a faint figure appear in my vision. Not a person, but a faint, unclear shape. Darkness enveloped me, making me feel like I was sinking into another space, where time no longer had meaning. I can't breathe anymore. This feeling, the feeling of being watched, observed, grew stronger and stronger. Have I begun to blend in with this house? Are memories from the past really affecting me? Or am I just becoming a part of this story, caught in a never-ending loop? And just as I was about to turn and run, the whisper returned, this time clearer than ever. Don't go, stay. The voice rang out from the very chair, from the very space I stood in. I can't bear it anymore. I collapsed, unable to fight this feeling. I will face it. There is no other way. Every corner of this house, every noise, every flicker of light, it all felt like part of a cruel game this entity had set up for me. It knew how to stir up memories, little elements that I had buried for a long time. Every event, every experience, is designed to pull me deeper into this loop. I took a deep breath, feeling the air in the room become thick, as if it were swallowing me whole. The attic door was tightly closed, and the light from the desk lamp seemed to fade in the darkness. I decided, if I have to live in this evil, at least I will understand it. I need to know exactly what it wants. I started recording all these strange things, every noise, every reflection, every unconscious gesture. But I am no longer naive, no longer hopeful that these things will pass. This entity doesn't want me to leave, doesn't want me to forget it. I found a notebook in the attic. It was covered in dust, the pages were yellow, but they were clearer than ever. There was something in those diary entries that I hadn't recognized, recurring events with strange appearances of vague figures, of people who had lived in this house before me. Fragments of memories and melodies returned in the night. And I know it's not just me that's being watched. Even those who had previously suffered the same thing. Those who lived and then disappeared from this house, swallowed by this presence. I can't continue living like that anymore. The feeling of being drawn into an invisible trap left me unable to breathe. It is a ghostly power, not from this world, but from another dimension, where memories and souls are trapped. The sounds are not accidental, the shadows are not accidental. Everything has a purpose, and I can't continue to hide. I stood up and slowly walked towards the attic. There was no doubt about it, I had made up my mind. This entity has learned to find ways to cling to me. It wanted me to stay, wanted me to continue being a part of the old memories it had redrawn. But I can't let it control me anymore. There needs to be an end. I must find a way to break this bondage, even if it means I have to face it once and for all. When I walked up the stairs, each step felt heavy. The walls seemed to press in on me, as if trying to stop me. But I can't stop. I've come too far. And as I got closer to the attic door, I knew I couldn't go back. Every morning, when I open my eyes, a strange suffocating feeling still haunts me, as if something is still close, almost imperceptible but enough to make all my senses sensitive. I couldn't convince myself that it was all just paranoia. Shadows ran through the corners of my eyes like invisible waves, sounds and memories were still hovering in my mind. The silent nights that I once longed for became strange, so quiet, that the silence became a wave that pushed me into endless suspense. For a moment, when I wondered if I had really gotten away with it, I caught the occasional soft hiss coming from the radio I had thrown away. There were times when I wanted to check again, only to find the same sound as before, a vague melody, but I didn't dare. I don't dare face something I can't explain, something I feel in every sigh of air, in every sudden flicker of light. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I feel like I'm still in that house, standing in the dark hallway, hearing footsteps echoing from nowhere. But when I turned around, there was no one there, only darkness. Dreams about the old house began to return in terrifyingly clear detail. I stood in the living room again, where everything was the same. But this time, I realized I was no longer alone. A figure stood in the corner, looking at me with unseeing eyes, and I knew it wasn't a hallucination. When I woke up, an inexplicable feeling of shivering still followed me. The old house is not just a place, it has become a part of me, like a shadow that follows me wherever I go. I still feel it, no matter where I am, no matter what I do. Sometimes, in my sleep, I dream that I'm back, crossing that threshold again, only to realize that something has followed me all along. Could I truly be free of that bondage, or had I simply allowed myself to be drawn into a never-ending obsession? I couldn't say it clearly, but the voice seemed to be waiting, as if it knew I would hear it, knew I would react. It was a strange feeling, as if the house, or the phone itself, could predict my moves, every decision I would make. I felt a presence not from the outside, but from deep inside, as if this phone was not just an antique, but a portal, a connection between two worlds. As I sat down, my hand clutching my phone, I could feel my breathing quicken. The words I heard from the other end of the line were not words I had ever heard, but there was an inexplicable familiarity. It was a sentence filled with anticipation, an invisible request, something I couldn't refuse. "Need someone," the voice whispered over the phone, "need someone to stay." A shiver rose within me, as if the very air had compressed itself, and I could feel the faint flicker of light in the room as if it were reacting to that voice. This feeling cannot be easily explained. I know I have to stop, I have to cut this link before it's too late. But sometimes, once you hear the call, it's hard to refuse. I can't leave. I can't turn it off. When I hung up the phone, the room immediately became so quiet that I could hear my heartbeat. But then, as soon as I returned to my work, strange signals started appearing again. This time, it wasn't the phone, but the hissing sound from my laptop. The screen lit up again, with lines of text similar to what I had read in the old diary. Need someone, again, and I couldn't escape this feeling, that everything was prepared. It was as if all the events were gradually unfolding, connecting to each other like invisible strings leading me into a chaos that I couldn't explain. Last night, I saw silhouettes passing by in the corners of my eyes, like hidden memories, or maybe unimaginable things. But it was this feeling, this unabashed feeling, that the house, or something in it, was still looking for me, still waiting for my return. I felt something very light, a cold breath run down my spine as I thought about what I had left behind. The waiting, the connection. It's still there, in every crevice, in every object I brought with me from the old house. The shadows still linger, the whispers still smolder in the air. Maybe I've escaped it, but maybe I've only allowed a part of it to take root inside me, forever. The calls kept coming, unscheduled, for no apparent reason. Sometimes, when I'm preparing dinner or watching TV, the phone rings, bringing with it an inexplicable feeling of fear. Every time, I feel the presence of an invisible force, something watching me, waiting for me to react. Unclear requests, questions about the past and present, they were imbued with familiarity, as if something in this house was coming to life through me. One day, as I sat alone in the living room, weak light shining through the dirty windows, the phone rang again. I can't stop myself. There's nothing in me that can refuse. My hands shook as I picked up the phone, hearing the gasp of a familiar voice. It asked me about things that I had never told anyone. Questions about an old house that I don't remember have come across strangely, about events that I have never experienced. The voice seemed to know everything, as if it was looking right through me, penetrating the deepest recesses of my memory. The feeling of being monitored is becoming more and more evident. When I tried to explain, tried to say that I didn't understand, that I didn't know anything about these things, the voice became more patient. It's not just asking, it's waiting. A presence that cannot be dispelled. The calls started to become a part of my life, and while I tried to resist them, I couldn't deny that a part of me had started to look forward to them. Sometimes I feel like if I don't take it, the house will come back to me. I started ignoring the calls, not answering them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting. Every time I heard the bell, a wave of fear rose within me. But the more you ignore it, the more strange things happen. The devices in the house become abnormal. Lights flicker non-stop, windows open and close for no reason. I realized that this incident wasn't just a joke, it wasn't just the tension that was scaring me. It's actually something bigger. A power was waiting for me, ready to pull me into its vortex. As each day passes, I feel less and less in control. The thin fabric of reality seems to be tearing, and I don't know what's real anymore. Every step I take in this house feels like I'm walking through a nightmare that never ends. Vague memories, voices and images, all intertwined like an inescapable web. My sense of time, of space, is starting to fade. The more I live in this house, the more I feel like I'm disappearing into it. Although I had achieved a temporary calm, the feeling of crisis constantly haunted me. It seems like there is something remaining, indelible, entangled in this room. The next morning, I decided to go out, leave the house for at least a day, to find peace again. However, as I was about to step out, a strange feeling of suffocation rose in my chest. My vision became blurry, as if I was no longer where I thought I was. That feeling clung to me with every step, as if the walls were tightening. My heart pounding in my ears, I walked out, but every time I looked back, I felt like my shadow was still in the house. Vague memories, whispers from the phone, still seemed to linger in the air around me. I tried to give it all up, but that presence couldn't be eliminated so easily. It not only wanted to take up space but also penetrate my mind, little by little. And now, no matter where I go, its shadow still follows, quietly, but always present. It was no longer a question of whether I would escape, but whether I could maintain myself while facing these inexplicable presences. Finally, I realized that hiding was no longer an option. Facing this phone is the only thing I can do. It has become a part of my life, a part of me in a way that I cannot explain. Every time I see it, I feel like a part of me has changed, like a part of my soul has been possessed. Like an invisible pulse from the past, it reached me through space and time, clinging to me with a strength I could not imagine. Even when I tried to delete it, push it away, the phone simply came back. The signals it emits seem to be created just to keep me with it, making me continue to face things I don't understand. Every time it appeared before me, I felt a strange fear welling up inside me. I couldn't determine where it came from, or what it really was, but I knew I couldn't run away. Again, I tried putting it out the window, placing it under a chair, but then, just like before, it appeared on my desk again. It was as if it followed me everywhere, clung to every space I passed, looked at me, and made me unable to stop thinking about it. I can't escape the feeling that it's a part of me, or perhaps I'm becoming a part of it. As I sat down at my desk, I felt my breathing quicken, but I had to continue. I know that I cannot throw this away easily. This connection between me and my phone, or maybe between me and something even darker lurking within those walls, was beyond any limits I had ever known. It was deeply ingrained in my mind, attached to my thoughts, indelibly. As each day passes, I feel the clinging of my phone more and more, the more I feel that the space around me is becoming blurry. Old memories, vague images, as if there was a change happening inside me that I couldn't control. That presence no longer only exists in objects, but also in my mind. It was a part of me, or I became a part of it. This strangeness, this paranoia, may have only just begun. However, the longer I lived in this apartment, the more I noticed strange signs that couldn't be ignored. The first few nights, I heard strange noises coming from within the walls, the creaking of wooden floors, the creaking of windows, as if inanimate objects were whispering in the darkness. I thought it was just the natural deterioration of the building, but the feeling of anxiety began to grow. Then, one evening, while I was sitting in the living room working, a figure passed outside the window. It was just a blur, but it startled me. I thought maybe I was too tired and imagined it. However, that feeling persisted, as if something was watching me from afar. And then I noticed something more terrifying. The room, although lit, felt strange, not really like the room I had chosen. One day, while cleaning out a few things, I discovered an old map lying in a hidden corner of the closet. This map is unlike any modern map I have ever seen. It maps out areas of this city, but with strange details I've never heard of. Roads, markers, places that didn't seem to exist in reality, they all pointed to an area near the building where I was living. That's when I realized that there was a connection between this apartment and a part of history that I had never known about. Old houses often have secrets, and it seems this apartment is no exception. A certain presence, maybe a memory, or something worse, is lingering in every wall, every space of this place. I started learning about the history of the building. What I found made me tremble. This building was once inhabited by very special people, an influential family many decades ago. They owned the building for many years, until strange events occurred, unexplained deaths, people suddenly disappearing. There is a record in ancient texts about this apartment becoming the residence of restless souls, trapped between two worlds. Some people believe they still exist in these spaces, trying to communicate through old objects, like phones, watches, or old books. I didn't want to believe this, but gradually, I couldn't deny that I felt something. Strange calls, mysteriously appearing objects, and now these maps, it all adds up to an incomplete story, a mystery waiting to be solved. And I, unable to resist, became a part of that story. Panic began to take root in me as I realized I couldn't simply leave this place. The apartment, with all its whimsy, clung to me. Like the old phone in the previous story, like the books I found at night, all have an unbreakable connection. A part of me has been drawn into the cracks of time and space, and now I feel like I'm at a crossroads of no return. One afternoon, as soft yellow light streamed through the window, I discovered a painting hanging on the wall that I had never seen before. It was an old landscape painting, discolored by time, looking like it had been placed there a long time ago. The strange thing is, I'm sure the painting wasn't there when I moved in. The details in the painting do not seem to belong to this time. The scene inside is vague and a bit strange. The empty streets, the bare trees, and the perpetually gloomy sky, all create a space that doesn't really belong to the present. I try not to think too much about the painting. Maybe it's just an old item, or just something forgotten. But there's no denying that every time I look at it, I feel a strange restlessness, as if it's calling to me. My eyes couldn't leave it, and even though I knew it was just a painting, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at something alive, something that had been sent from somewhere. Every time I return to the apartment after a long day, I feel that presence rising within me, as if something is lurking in the darkness. Whenever I reached out to turn off the lights or open the door, I felt an invisible pressure. A sound, a slight vibration on the floor, or a fleeting movement in the corner of my eye makes my heart pound. All of that reminds me of the dreams I've had, dreams that aren't just vague images but a real feeling of something waiting. One night, while I was sitting in my office, I heard a knock on the door. A soft but clear sound seemed to come from the living room. I stood up, couldn't believe my ears, but when I walked out, no one was there. The room was empty, so silent that it was unimaginable. But that strange feeling remained, something vague and unsettling, as if this house had a way of announcing its presence to me. In order not to be overcome by anxiety, I tried to face it, continued my work, tried to ignore strange events. But every time I do that, the memories and feelings of that presence come rushing back. The more I tried to chase them away, the more I felt them clinging to me. And then, one night, I stood by the window and looked out. Thick shadows swirled around the neighborhood, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw someone, a figure standing outside the window, looking at me. But when I turned around, it was gone. These inexplicable events only increase over time. Every day I live in this apartment, I feel the tension rising. This space is not only where I live, but also a door, a turn that I cannot stop. Perhaps, it's time for me to face it and learn the truth, even though it may be something I cannot accept. I stood there, unable to believe my eyes. What just happened could not be explained, and the darkness of the room, the sudden change of space made me feel like I had just entered another space where the laws of time were no longer valid. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of what had happened, but nothing changed. I'm in my apartment again, the living room is modern and clean, no trace of people wearing vintage clothes anymore. The feeling of suffocation inside me did not subside. Even worse, I realized that the room had changed without any reasonable explanation. This space seems to have its own way of pulling me into strange moments, times returning to a past that I cannot control. Suddenly, I found myself standing in front of my phone again, an old item that had become an obsession. Since then, there has been no quiet night. Every time I entered the apartment, I felt a presence that I couldn't explain. The walls seemed to flicker, and every time I looked at my phone, I couldn't help but feel a strange gravity, as if I were being pulled into another world where everything felt distorted and strange. Every day, the vague memories of the people in the apartment, the people who once lived here, follow me. They seem to be trying to recreate a forgotten part of history, immersing me in moments that did not belong to this era. I began to doubt my presence here, not because I lived in an old apartment, but because I felt like I was part of that space, surrounded by memories that did not belong to me. Maybe I was wrong to think I could live a normal life in this apartment. Reality proved otherwise. Strange, unexplainable events were happening right before my eyes, and every time I thought I had escaped them, they pulled me back in again. It seems that I am not only haunted by the past, but also by what I have left behind, the traces that I cannot erase. One night last week, I tried to leave the apartment, determined to find a way to escape these nightmares. But when I stepped outside, I felt the air thick, as if the house itself was holding me, not letting me go. Shadows passed back and forth in front of the window, the wind blew through the cracks like whispers that I couldn't hear clearly. I stopped, unable to move forward, as if an invisible force was pulling me back, keeping me in this space. Like a warning that could not be denied, the presence of the past continued to dominate my life, drawing me into strange moments that I could not understand. Now, I no longer have any doubts. This apartment, the phone, the vague memories, it's all part of a larger presence, something I can't escape, no matter how hard I try. I tried to breathe deeply, but the air in the room seemed thick and uncomfortable, as if I was surrounded by something invisible, watching my every move. My heartbeat pounded loudly in my throat, and when I turned my back, an extremely strange feeling came over me, as if there was something behind me, almost visible, but not clearly identifiable. I walked quickly out of the living room, my heart still pounding. No one chased me, but the feeling that that shadow was still somewhere in this house haunted me, like a shadow that never left. This feeling is inexplicable, it is so vivid and real that I cannot let it go. While running through the hallways, I couldn't help but think that this space, these memories, might not just be hallucinations. When I got to the door, I noticed the main door was tightly closed. I have never closed it like that. I tried opening the door but it didn't move. A light knock on the door made me turn around, and that's when I saw the man, who I had seen earlier in the living room, standing right behind me, as if he had appeared from that space without even realizing it. I hesitantly stepped closer, but I couldn't escape the feeling that these images, these silhouettes, these noises were not random. Something was forcing me to face them, something I couldn't understand. The man's eyes didn't move, but in those strange moments, I realized his eyes were not the gaze of a living person. A cold feeling enveloped me. I tried to scream but only came out with a weak sigh. I tripped over myself when I realized I hadn't just returned to this house, I'd returned to a past, a reality I had no control over. This house wasn't just holding me back, it was pulling me back to moments I thought I'd gotten away from. Suddenly, all I felt was the air stop. A silence covered everything, not a sound, not a breath. And then, everything around me seemed to shut down, not just sound, but time, space, reality. as if this house had pulled me into another world, a world I couldn't get out of. I could only stand there, feeling the cold seep into my skin, my perception of reality gradually disappearing. At that moment, I realized that everything was not a nightmare. The nightmare started when I entered this house. And now, it is no longer a dream. I walked through the door, but as soon as I entered the hallway, I felt an invisible force pulling me back. It wasn't just fear, it was an existence, something attached to this apartment, as if the house had permeated every part of me. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor, and each step I took seemed heavier, as if time itself was working against me. As I continued toward the door, I heard light footsteps following me, as if someone was following me. I turned around, but no one was there. Yet I felt a presence, an inexplicable feeling, a watchfulness that never left me. I had to tell myself it was just my imagination, but my body didn't believe that excuse. Suddenly, my old phone appeared in my sight again, even though I must have thrown it out a few days ago. Its lights glowed faintly in the darkness, as if waiting for me to return. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that it wasn't just an inanimate object, it was part of something larger, more haunting. Something that cannot be easily erased or explained away. My palms sweated as I walked closer to the phone, but a strange force forced me to pick it up. My fingers trembled as I raised the stethoscope, my heart pounding like it was about to burst. I hoped that nothing would happen this time, but a faint whisper from the other end of the phone paralyzed me. That voice, this time, seemed very close. It wasn't the same as before, it was almost standing right behind me. "There is no escape," the voice whispered, and it carried an indescribable coldness. "I want to throw the phone away, but I can't. It feels like there is a strange connection between me and this house, a connection I cannot break. The walls are closing in around me, like a shadow swallowing reality." In that moment, I understood that I could not escape. Every time I think I'm out, every time I think I've left this house, it pulls me back. Memories and vague images of the past have begun to pile up, and I can't tell what is real and what is fantasy. Suddenly, the light in the hallway flickered, and I heard footsteps becoming clearer and clearer. They are not mine. A feeling of paralysis engulfed me as I realized that there was something that was not me living in this space, but a part of it, an inseparable part. And when I turned around, I saw that shadow, there was no mistaking it. It was waiting for me. The feeling that I was leaving a nightmare that I couldn't stop. The elevator system kept banging against my walls, and my legs, even though I tried not to shake, felt heavy like I couldn't move anymore. But I had to get out of this place. The daylight ahead increased my alertness. My mind was like a torn book, full of vague memories and inexplicable events. As I approached the main door, my palms were sweaty, not only from anxiety, but also from a chilling cold feeling. Some force was pulling me back, as if everything in this building was resisting my leaving. But I still walked out, not letting this heavy feeling dominate me any longer. I knew, if I kept going back, if I hesitated just one more second, I would never escape. Stepping outside, open air surrounded me, but that air did not have the feeling of complete freedom. I got over this house, but a part of me still can't let go of what I went through. I can't stop looking back, even though I know it's over. The feeling that I had avoided a trap was unclear, but it always lingered, as if I had made a wrong move myself. And when I reached the street, one question still echoed in my mind. Can I really escape? Or just temporary? Every time I leave this place, the memories still exist in me, pushing me into a wound that has not yet healed. I kept walking, knowing that even though I walked out, the house, the images, and my old phone would never completely leave me. And that indifference, left me colder than any threat. It is not hostility or hatred. It was a kind of silence that couldn't be filled, as if I was just a part of an old story, a figure without purpose, without meaning. Everything was happening as part of a loop that I couldn't escape from, even though I had left my physical body. I was no longer able to determine what was real and what was an illusion. Can I really escape those hallways? Or have I simply become a part of them, like shadows passing through the window of time, always following me, reminding me of the existence of the incomprehensible? Why did I return to that house, even though I had decided to leave forever? Because what drew me back, only to leave again in an endless, unending loop? I don't know anymore. Maybe it's just the tenacity of the mind, wanting to prove that you have won, that you have overcome fear. But that fear never left me. It still follows me, discreetly like a shadow, watching me through long nights. I couldn't stop thinking about that house, about what happened in those dark hallways. It changed me, and even though I left, I couldn't escape the feeling that a part of me was still stuck there, in a reality I couldn't reach, couldn't explain. The memories of that house will forever be a part of me, whether I like it or not. Perhaps, this is a story that never ends. There isn't a clear answer to what I went through. And perhaps, that's what scares me the most. That house, those hallways, and that phone will always exist within me, like a permanent secret that I cannot remove. Every night, that voice rang out, clear and decisive, even though I had never seen the speaker. It wasn't just a sound, but a presence, as if it was controlling everything around me. Every time I wake up, I feel more tired, as if I've lived a long day even though it's only early in the morning. Those nightmares begin to blend with reality, blurring the boundaries between the two worlds. Then one night, after a short nap, I woke up and noticed something had changed in my room. The walls, once simple and familiar, now seemed hazy, as if they were glittering under a layer of mist. The window no longer opened to a normal scene, but a dark, cold campus. I shivered, not knowing why I felt that way. I should have just woken up from a normal sleep, but something was wrong. Then I started noticing little strange things. Furniture in the house began to change position, not because I moved it, but on its own. One morning I discovered the clock on the wall had turned backwards, even though I was sure I had set it correctly. Sometimes I even hear footsteps and whispers, even though I live alone. Perhaps it was the noise of the wind through the cracks in the door, but I couldn't deny that those sounds always had a certain rhythm, as if someone was moving around me. Gradually, the perception of space in my house changed. Each room becomes larger or smaller at different times. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I don't recognize my reflection anymore. Small details like my skin, my eyes, even my facial expressions, seemed blurred, as if I wasn't quite myself. And during late nights, I feel as if an invisible force is watching me, listening to my every step, waiting for me to do next. This has made me feel more and more insecure in my own home. Even though I tried to go to sleep and ignore the feeling of insecurity, it was still there, thick and inescapable. An inexplicable feeling of heaviness hung in space, as if there was something invisible but always present in every hidden corner. I decided to look into the house, hoping that there was a reasonable explanation for these strange events. But all I found was a vague history. The previous owner of the house has mysteriously disappeared, and no one in the area knows much about this house's past. It's all just a series of stories with no beginning or end, a fog that the more I learn, the more I feel lost in. The following nights, as I lay in the dark, I felt as if someone was standing next to my bed, staring at me. And it wasn't anyone else that I myself could recognize in the strange reflections. Even though I tried many ways to escape that feeling, the house kept pulling me into a never-ending spiral. All of those stories seemed to be weaving an invisible network, connecting each house and each resident in this area. It seemed like we were all caught in an inexplicable vortex. Footprints on the ground, similar nightmares, grit that mysteriously appeared on his hands. I feel like I'm no longer alone in these events, but that doesn't make me feel any less scared. On the contrary, I felt like I was standing in the middle of an ever-growing mystery, and each step brought me closer to a truth I had no desire to discover. One evening, I couldn't resist going out late at night. Curiosity ate away at my reason, and I decided to check the area around the house one more time, this time at night. As I approached the land behind the house, I saw fresh footprints. The cold shot through me as I realized they weren't mine. Those footprints continued to lead me to a hidden corner near a vent. My breathing quickened, and I felt like I was entering a space I couldn't escape from. I saw strange flashing lights from inside the vent. It wasn't like the light from an indoor lamp, but something eerie and cold. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to crawl in. Step by step, I pressed my body into the opening, feeling the cold wind blowing past. The space inside is so strange. Although I had been into this area many times before, this time it had a completely different feel. Inside, everything has a faded color. Thick musty smell. It seemed like I was entering not only a physical space, but also a space of sealed memories. The light still flickered strangely, and in the darkness, I could feel something watching me. The silence was oppressive around me, as if I wasn't alone in it, even though I didn't see anyone. Footsteps sounded right behind me, as if someone was quietly watching from behind. I turned around, not having time to breathe. No one stood there. But I felt a presence so distinct that I could feel the hairs on my body stand on end. All my senses began to warn me that something wasn't right. Even though I don't see it, I know it's there. We are not simply coexisting in this space, we are sharing it. When I turned around and left that area, I felt like I had just escaped from something terrible. But the relief was fleeting, quickly giving way to the feeling that I hadn't escaped. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I began to suspect that I had accidentally entered another world where time no longer followed the rules I knew. When I got home, I felt a change in the air. Everything around me seemed to be the same, but an inexplicable unease invaded my mind. The next night, I couldn't sleep, not because of anxiety but because of the feeling that something had completely changed in this space. It feels like I'm living in a never-ending loop. The truth seemed blurred, and I began to doubt myself. The dreams have returned, with vivid and terrifying images, and I can't escape the feeling that I'm living in a past I can't remember clearly. My sense of space and time was disturbed, and I couldn't tell if these events were really happening or just part of an ongoing nightmare. Can I continue to live in this insecurity, or will I forever be trapped in its vortex? And I could feel an invisible presence waiting. Even though I knew the room was still the same, nothing had changed, but this strange feeling kept surrounding me, making me unable to get rid of the restlessness in my heart. I told myself to stay calm, but my heart kept pounding, and I felt like something was waiting for me to enter, watching my every move. This feeling is so strong, it makes me unable to breathe. When I entered the living room, the lights from the dim fluorescent lights flickered strangely, as if they were trying to say something I couldn't understand. The air around me became heavy, and I realized that I was not alone. Even though I couldn't see anyone, I could feel someone's presence in the room. I turned my head and realized that no one was standing there, but that feeling, that terrifying anticipation, still couldn't be extinguished. Suddenly, I realized that I couldn't continue living in this house. All my research, recurring dreams, and strange signs in this compound led me to one inevitable conclusion. I was no longer just a witness, I had become a part of this experiment, a part of a world I could not understand. Everything in this house has a tight connection, as if it were controlled by an uncontrollable force. I couldn't stay here any longer, but when I thought about leaving, a deep anxiety rose in my heart. Am I avoiding something I cannot control? Will this choice really help me escape everything, or is it just temporary? I looked around the room, trying to find some reassurance, but all I had was the feeling that I was imprisoned, not by physical walls but by the past itself, by what had happened and what would continue to haunt me forever. In that moment, I realized that I might never get out. Maybe this started long before I knew it, and now I was caught in a web that I couldn't untangle. What I'm left with is just a memory, a ghost that follows me for the rest of my life. The feeling of tension, as if there was a presence watching our every move, gradually enveloped everything. As we took precautions, trying to keep the basement and other areas of the house open, the strangeness increased. Those meetings did not calm our fears. Instead, we feel more and more like we are being forced into a narrow corner, where there is no way out. We can't escape our dreams, we can't escape the darkness that takes over us every night. As much as we tried to share and deal with this fear, something in each of us felt as though we were trapped in an unbreakable cycle. The sleepless nights were long, when the dim light of the fluorescent lights was still not enough to dispel the darkness. The basement becomes a symbol of fear, like a never-ending nightmare. Every time we stepped down, we felt like we were diving deeper into another world, where strange commands were forced into our minds. The longer it goes, the harder it becomes to distinguish between what is a dream and what is reality. That voice, the voice we all heard, was no longer just a part of our nightmares. It has begun to infiltrate our waking lives. We can no longer control ourselves. Sometimes, in sudden moments, I feel my hand moving unconsciously, as if something other than me was controlling it. My eyes blurred, and before I could react, I found myself standing in front of the basement door, shovel in hand. We started to wonder if we were really on top or just pawns in this game. A game that we are never allowed to fully understand, but are unconsciously drawn into. The appearance of dirt stains, faint footprints under fingernails, has become a symbol of loss of control. Now, not only are the nights long and haunting, but even when awake, we still live in fear. We are no longer fighting it. We simply exist. And with each passing day, the fear deepens, like a shadow that never leaves. A strange feeling rose in me as we went deeper. Those devices, although old and dusty, didn't seem like things we should find here. Part of me was skeptical, but another part felt drawn to them, as if a call from the past was drawing us closer. Flashlights flashed across shattered screens and controls that were worn, but still intact. A small hiss suddenly came from one of the devices, startling me. The group stood still, holding their breath, the only sound being the rustling of vines wrapping around the tunnel. One of the group, with a shaking hand, reached up to adjust an old switch. As soon as he did, the room vibrated gently, as if some device had woken up. A cracking sound, like music from an old radio, began to emanate from the speakers of those devices. We heard disjointed, discontinuous sounds, as if trying to piece together memories from a long-ago era. The voice rang out again, this time clearer than ever. It was the voice we heard in our dreams, inviting us to keep digging, to keep uncovering long-buried secrets. I feel like I can't stand it anymore. My eyes were blurry, my body was tired, and there was a distinct feeling that I was facing something inexplicable. Part of me told me to run, but another part, a part one couldn't control, urged me to go deeper into that bunker. It seems like there is something that has been waiting for us for a long time, something that has been hidden in this darkness, waiting for the moment to awaken. We can't retreat, one of the group said, his voice no longer as certain as before. This isn't just an ordinary mystery anymore. We've opened up something very different. I looked around and saw fear on the faces of the remaining people. We didn't just explore an old house or an abandoned building, we have entered something bigger, something that cannot be explained by any formula or theory. The old radios and strange mechanical devices seem to contain something mystical, an invisible link to the past, and perhaps even to the future. We have to stop, I said, my voice hoarse. Something is watching us, it doesn't want us to move on. But it was too late. The room began to change around us. The walls seemed to move, and the light from the flashlight flickered. Every step we take in this space is no longer a search for answers but a fight for survival with an invisible shadow waiting, a shadow that is not just a vague image but a real presence that fills the air around us. The feeling of being watched still hasn't let me go, no matter how hard I try to avoid it. All these signs, these strange phenomena that I cannot explain, they always gnaw at my mind, as if I were living in a nightmare from which I would never wake up. Vague whispers in the dark night, objects that inexplicably change within sight, dreams that are no longer reflections of the mind but become irregular commands. Every night, I listened with caution, afraid that I would once again be caught in a vortex from which I could not escape. I knew I couldn't simply ignore it. Everything seemed silent, but I felt that invisible existence. The wind chimes, even though there is no wind, sound like a warning, like a never-ending threat. When I close my eyes, I can't stop worrying about what might happen if I don't watch closely. I fear that all we have destroyed is not the end. Maybe those notebooks, those experiments, weren't all that was buried. Maybe something is still being maintained, waiting to one day awaken. And when it wakes up, there will be no turning back. I tried to find peace, but each time the daylight faded, I felt more clearly the invisible presence that still hovered around me. There are nights when I wake up with my heart pounding, my throat dry, as if shadows are still playing around me, waiting for the moment to start again. We destroyed the devices, but they didn't need them to survive. Something was planted long before I entered this life, and perhaps I am just a part of it. That shadow, something we couldn't understand, was still there, watching from afar. Every time I looked out the window, the moonlight seemed to gently glide through the shadows of the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was lurking, always in the shadows, always within reach but never reached. That clock, with its eerie stillness, became the center of a widespread obsession. Every minute that passes, every beat of the clock seems to hit my mind, like an indelible reminder. A feeling of dread rose every time I passed the study, where it hung on the wall, looking at me with the eyes of the man in the portrait. Those eyes, even though they were just a small picture, always watched me, making me feel like there was an invisible presence, always near me, always monitoring me. The first nights, I didn't even dare sit near it. But then, gradually, a strange force pulled me closer, making it impossible for me to tear myself away from its presence. The clock seemed to have a mysterious power, a power that penetrated my thoughts, as if each of its rhythms were rewriting my thoughts, controlling me from the inside. Since bringing it home, I have felt a change in the air. Its shadow, unclear but distinct, as if it was waiting for something. And it became even more apparent when I couldn't remember what I did some nights, especially when I woke up the next morning, feeling like I'd lost some time. Its signs are blurriness in memories, strange feelings that I can't explain. But then, one night, as I sat in my study, the light of the desk lamp flickered continuously, as if the lamp was reflecting something else in the space. A cold wave ran down my spine as I realized I was no longer in complete control of everything around me. Vague noises, like light taps on the wall, passed through my ears. I stood up, walked closer to the clock, and suddenly, I realized that the clock was no longer the same. It stopped running, stopped synchronizing with time, but the scary feeling still existed, like an indelible mark. And I knew, looking at that clock, that I wasn't just dealing with an antique. I was facing something bigger, deeper, part of a story I had never really understood. Memories that don't seem to be mine, but are very familiar, keep coming back. Passages in books, diary pages that I never read, all blend together, like something inevitable. And now, it is clinging to me, just like that, forever. Even though I tried everything to hide it, the strange feeling of being watched couldn't be dispelled. No matter where I placed the clock, even in a closed room or under a thick sheet, it echoed in my mind like a silent bell gnawing at my thoughts. It has become a part of me, a part of my life, that cannot be denied. The days I thought I could escape it only pulled me closer. One evening, I sat in the living room, exhausted after a long day filled with worries. The air was heavy, as if every breeze carried something unsettling. For once, I didn't hear a ticking sound. I could feel it, but it was silent, as if the clock itself was waiting for me, leaving me to face something unresolved. My eyes glanced at the clock on the shelf, where it still stood, as if waiting for me to notice something. I can't stand long silence. It wasn't that the clock was silent, it was that I was silenced. At that moment, I realized that I could no longer control its presence. It got to me in a way I can't explain. The long sleepless nights, with constant nightmares and endlessly recurring thoughts about what the clock was trying to indicate, had begun to build in me a paranoia. Late one night, as I opened my eyes and peered into the darkness of my room, I found myself unable to escape the thought that a clock was more than just an inanimate object. It is a piece of something larger, deeper. It was a door, a threshold into a world I wasn't ready to face, but couldn't avoid. And, I wonder, will I ever escape this obsession? That's when I realized, I couldn't choose anymore. Sure, I could try walking away from it, leaving it all behind, but what if everything I've done so far, every decision, every step, has led me to that clock? Can I continue to live in a world where time is no longer mine, but something else's, manipulating everything? At one point, I couldn't distinguish between reality and illusions. I had become a puppet, controlled by the clock's shadowy urges and the nightmares that surrounded me. Reality seems to be torn apart, the boundaries between day and night become blurred and blurred. I swore I wouldn't let this obsession take over, but every time I walked away from the clock, it found a way to return, drawing me into a vicious cycle I couldn't escape from. During the long days, I tried to live normally, even tried to avoid unusual things by going out, meeting friends, and working more. However, every time I return home, I feel its presence, gentle but undeniable. It felt like I was under an unbreakable curse, one that could haunt me for the rest of my life. Every time I glance at the clock on the wall, its eyes follow me, almost observing my every move. It felt like that watch could understand me, as if it was not just an inanimate object but a living being existing in time and space with me. It seems to be asking itself, when will you surrender completely and let me dominate? I couldn't escape the feeling that everything I did only brought me closer to the ending the clock had planned for me. I began to suspect that everything I did, from trying to quit it to trying to live a normal life, were just parts of the game it was playing. My moves are all premeditated, and there is no way to escape this control. That feeling, of being watched and controlled, made me almost lose control. During long sleepless nights, my eyes opened only to see invisible but clear changes in the clock and in the paintings on the wall. The eyes in the paintings seemed to be following my every move, and I couldn't escape the feeling that once again, I would be faced with the voice, with the inescapable compulsion. With each passing day, I felt myself falling deeper into the abyss of obsession. The space around me seemed to be suffocating me little by little. Once I put the watch in my house, I understood that I could no longer retreat. My reality, my reason, it all seemed to have been twisted in a direction that I couldn't reverse. All I can do is keep living, keep enduring this feeling. I don't know if I can survive this obsession for long, but I know one thing for sure, I will never part with the watch. I have lost all faith in normalcy. Every day, I wake up with the feeling that I am no longer myself. The vague feeling of a presence, invisible but undeniable, haunted me from the dark corners of the house. The rivulets of floorboards are no longer random noises, they became signals of something watching me, something that might be moving in the darkness, almost waiting for me to return. And even the objects in my house seemed to no longer be intact. The books on the shelves suddenly turned upside down, the paintings on the wall gradually changed their perspective as if they had their own lives, peering around following my movements. The clock hanging on the wall, still counting the seconds, seemed not simply an object, but a haunting companion, waiting for me to accept its existence in my world. Every time I look in the mirror, I see that I am not the person I once knew. My facial features changed, my skin became paler. I am aging rapidly, and my eyes no longer have freshness. I felt as if the clock was slowly eating away every moment, pulling me into a space beyond my control. There's no denying that I was completely caught up in it. The days began to pass like in a dream. I can't differentiate between when it's reality and when it's an illusion. The cold feeling in the house did not lessen, but only became heavier, as if the atmosphere was surrounding me. At night, I can no longer sleep, and when I close my eyes, I can still hear the ticking of the clock echoing in my head. It was no longer the simple sound of time, but a threat, a sign of the near approach of invisible evil. There were times when I thought I could let go, could break this vicious cycle, but nothing could help me. Even when I took the watch out of the room, it still found a way to come back. It always comes back, like an inevitable thing. Feeling trapped in a space between realities, a space where every action was fruitless, I knew I was falling into an endless circle. Every time I look at the portrait on the wall, I feel those eyes following me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was rearranging itself around me, mysteriously and inexplicably. What I feel, what I see, are signals from another world pouring in. Or is it just part of the paranoia that is taking over my mind? I don't have answers to these questions. But every night, the ticking continued, and I couldn't help but feel a stirring of something in the air. Maybe I made a mistake I can't come back from. I took the watch outside, determined to keep it in a box I had found in storage. My breath was still choked, my chest felt heavy. Contact with the watch made me feel like a part of me was being taken away, moment by moment, little by little. As I strapped it to the box, I could feel the weight of failure in my every movement. But I know that locking it up, hiding it far away, might be the only way I can stop this nightmare. I tried to close the box, breathing heavily to try and steady myself, but as soon as I replaced the lid, I felt a distortion, a change in the air around me. The feeling was something I couldn't describe in words, as if an invisible force was pushing the box out of my hand. Before I realized it, the box fell to the floor, emitting a cold sound. I looked down at the box, my hands shaking as if I had just been stripped of my last control. Tension rises, it feels like everything in the house is shrinking, cramped and suffocating. I looked at the box I had closed, but again, some presence within me understood that I couldn't escape it. The space in the room seemed to stretch and contract, closing in on me suffocatingly, as if the walls were tightening around me. Each tick of the clock, although hidden, was like a whisper in the air. The dark night had fallen and I could feel the unusual, oppressive, and uncomfortable silence. Even though I did everything to hide it, I knew it still existed in this house, still stalking me in every action, every moment. And then I realized, even though I may forget it for the moment, it will always be here, in the darkness, waiting to return. I felt the silence of the house, heavy and the air filled with gloom. Sometimes, when I sit down to write, I can hear a gentle ticking, like an echo of the past, and even though I know that the clock is buried in the basement, I still feel an inexplicable presence. Something that doesn't completely disappear. Fears still follow me, like a ghost that won't leave, even though I've done everything I can to push it out of sight. On quiet nights, when I lie in the dark, I sometimes hear strange sounds. There was a brief noise, a sound like the ticking of a clock, but when I looked again, there was nothing. I felt a cold sweat down my spine and told myself it was just my imagination. But deep inside, I can't shake the feeling that that obsession has never truly left me. This insecurity never completely goes away. It just hides, quietly waiting. Even though I could continue living, continuing to learn, working, even having moments of peace, every time I looked into the darkness of the house, I couldn't help but feel a strange connection between me and the clock, as if it was still there, a part of me, a part of the world that I couldn't explain. This insidious feeling of fear, though I can suppress myself, I know that one day, maybe just for a brief moment, I will have to face it again. And I can't be sure that I will make it through this time. But until then, I will live in a strange state of sobriety, trying to hold on to the last bit of control, hoping that I have, at least, conquered the darkness that lurks within that clock. As the predictions from the typewriter continued to sound, I felt like I was sinking into a vortex with no way out. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't deny that I was being controlled by something that was not of my making. The strange, menacing phrases from the typewriter were no longer simply random words. They seemed to be arranged to stifle the remaining hope in me little by little, word by word, pushing me into despair. One night, as I sat at my desk, my hands shaking, trying to type out a sentence that I hoped would bring me liberation, I suddenly noticed something incomprehensible. The typewriter, which could only produce words through the touch of keys, turned on automatically. The entire keyboard lit up without any hands touching it. Panic rose within me as each word, each phrase appeared as if the machine itself was writing prophecies about my fate. It will all end tomorrow. That sentence appeared again. I can't stand it anymore. That feeling, like an invisible hand squeezing my heart, made me feel like everything in the house was shrinking, suffocating me in a small, dark space. The walls seemed to be moving, the space seemed to gradually lose the solidity that I once believed in. I stood up and rushed out of the room, but the typewriter continued to hum behind me, making predictions as if they were watching my every move. When I got back into the room, I couldn't believe my eyes. The typewriter is no longer just a writing tool. It was like a living creature, with the power to control everything around me. The keys flashed continuously, creating mysterious messages that I couldn't explain. I clenched my fists, having no choice but to face it myself. But I realized that something deeper was controlling me. Maybe, not only the machine, but also the memories that I had unintentionally created from previous times, were being reborn and taking over my mind. The typewriter was just the door for me to enter this nightmare. In the midst of my panic, I heard that familiar ticking sound again. It's not from the typewriter, but from somewhere in the space of this house itself, something old, lingering with every step I take. When I looked at the objects around me, I realized that everything seemed to be changing. They are waiting for something, as if everything is arranged in an order that I cannot change. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something invisible, of which the typewriter was only its outward appearance. This is not paranoia anymore. It is an entity, an inexplicable force, that has been here for a long time. It already knew everything, could see the future through words, and now it was trying to make me a part of it. It's not a nightmare anymore. That's reality. And I don't know if I can get out of it again. The feeling of urgency gripped me tightly, penetrating deep into every joint, as if the very air in this apartment was breathing with me, with every beat of my heart. The mornings after nightmares became battles to maintain my sanity, as I clung to every little habit, hoping it would help me banish the darkness that lingered in my mind. But then, the typewriter reappeared, as an indispensable part of my life, clinging to me like an inseparable part. Every time I think I've gotten away from it, it finds a way to come back. There is an indelible obsession in every keystroke of it. A familiar clack, followed by words that didn't seem to be of my own making, words that I never intended to write. And in the extreme loneliness of the night, the words appeared again, as if they were calling me, pulling me into a maze with no way out. One evening, as I sat at my desk, I couldn't stand it anymore. Something has definitely changed in me. Every sentence I write, every word I type, I feel like I'm no longer in control. My eyes blurred, not because of fatigue, but because of something far away, a strange feeling as I became aware that I was gradually losing control. And then, I heard the knocking, one after another, stretching out into the darkness. A short click, followed by a longer string of words, pulled me back into my confused thoughts. The end is coming. You will not be able to escape it. Only after these words appeared did I realize that the typewriter was more than just a tool. It is something with invisible power, controlling all my actions. My sense of reality gradually became hazy. I couldn't distinguish between me and something else taking over my thoughts. I tried leaving it off again. I put the typewriter in a box, locking it in a trunk. But the next morning, the machine was there again, on my desk, with a new sheet of paper, blinking in the dark, as if waiting for me to continue my work. I can't bear it anymore. I have lost all strength to fight, all hope of being able to escape this vicious cycle. Every time I look at the machine, I no longer recognize myself. It has eaten away at my freedom. What I'm left with is a ghost, controlled by words I can't erase. And as an integral part of the story, the typewriter still types. This time, it was a prophecy, not of the end, but of a warning that I would never be able to stop. But my friend just looked at me, with dreamy eyes, as if he didn't quite understand. I tried to explain, but the words came out of my mouth, unable to come out as complete sentences. I feel as if every word I say is sucked into the air, never reaching anyone else's ears. The long evenings, where I stayed awake, listening to the vague whispers from the typewriter, gradually turned me into a puppet, just typing and waiting for my demise. One day, I decided to try something different. I will not let the typewriter continue to control everything. With determination, I walked over to the machine, my hands shaking as I looked at the keys. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and started typing a completely different sentence. The words are not prophecies, not warnings, but ordinary sentences about life, about light, about the future. But as soon as I started typing, I felt a change in the air. My fingers, although trying to maintain a normal rhythm, seemed to be pulled back by an invisible force. Every time I type, it seems like the machine changes my words, reworking them into familiar lines, warnings, obsessions that I can't control. And then, new sentences appeared on the screen, one sentence suddenly. Are you ready? My heart was pounding, as if each beat was a strong knock on my heart, making me almost stop breathing. The typewriter is no longer just a tool, it has become a living, conscious organism with its own intentions. Its words are no longer just predictions. They are a call, a promise of something inevitable. A feeling of despair rose within me. I couldn't stop feeling that fear. Every step I took, every breath I took, I felt like I was being caught in a trap that I had created for myself. Even though I tried to get rid of it, the typewriter was like a never-ending nightmare that kept haunting me, making it impossible for me to find any way out. During the night, when the machine started typing again, I realized that I was no longer in control. It controlled me, took over me, and controlled everything I thought, everything I felt. My footsteps echoed in the silence, the tapping of my steps seemed to reflect off the walls, repeating endlessly. The air in the storage room is cold and damp. A wave of fear rushed over me, invading my mind as I entered. My whole body seemed to be restrained, a feeling of paralysis covered the whole thing. I can't explain why, but I feel like I'm not alone in this space. My trembling fingers touched the cold doorknob. At this moment, my heart was beating so fast that I felt like everything around me was shaking, and I could no longer hold on to reality. When the door opened, the space inside was pitch black. A gust of cold wind made me shiver. I turned on the flashlight, the weak light illuminating the old items around me. They were piled up boxes, torn cloth bags, and still covered in dust. But what made me stop were the faint shadows, like glimpses of silhouettes in the corners of the room, as if something was moving in the darkness. A small noise sounded behind me. I turned around, my heart pounding. There's no one. I continued walking, my heart beating faster, when I noticed something different. An old typewriter, located right on the table in the middle of the room. How long has it been here? Haven't I put it away? I can't remember. The typewriter lay motionless, but I could feel something like a shadowy power radiating from it. I hesitated, stood still, my eyes never left it. A voice suddenly rang in my head, as if the typewriter was whispering. It's time. I was startled, my eyes opened wide, I couldn't believe what I just heard. But when I looked at the machine, I saw the keys gradually moving, automatically, one by one, as if an invisible hand was controlling it. Don't be afraid, just keep going. I can't move. A chill ran down my spine as I watched the words slowly appear on the page, like a ghostly whisper. Everything is ready. It's too late. The typewriter continued to type, and I could only stand there, motionless, unable to escape its vortex. Those words were not mine, but they had a strange power that kept me from leaving. The feeling of fear froze, controlling all my thoughts. In that moment, I realized that I was not only being manipulated by the typewriter, but also being led into another dimension by my own fears. Do I still have a chance to escape this vicious cycle, or has it really begun to control my life from the depths of darkness? The feeling of being trapped, as if all escape routes were locked, overwhelmed me. I couldn't stay there any longer. My steps were heavy and unclear, as if I were being pulled down a path from which I could not turn back. The feeling of darkness around me seemed to envelop me and pull me into an invisible abyss. I ran through the hallway, trying not to let the crushing feeling in my chest stop me. When I reached the door, I pushed hard on the door handle. But no matter how hard I tried, the door refused to open. It was like the room had changed its structure, trapping me in an inescapable space. An inexplicable weight was pressed against my chest, as if I were imprisoned in another reality. Cold sweat gradually covered my body. I turned around, and suddenly, that strange presence seemed to be laughing at me, it was invading my every breath, every movement. The gloomy images appeared before my eyes again, those words kept repeating in my head, as if they were not my product anymore. There's no escaping it. You're just a part of it. That voice no longer came from the typewriter. It is echoing in my mind. It feels like the wall is gradually tightening. This space is no longer my home. The shadows in the room seem to have a purpose of their own, moving from corner to corner, as if the room was alive and it was digesting me. Every step I take gets closer to the truth I cannot face. I can't think of a logical reason for what's happening. Everything became blurry. It seemed like reality was twisting, lifting me into another space that I couldn't control. Every night, I wake up in vivid nightmares. Every time I wake up, I feel like something has changed, something is in the room, in me. An invisible feeling of desire is present. Can't escape, can't stop. I gasped, trying to find a way out. But each panic attack only brought me closer to the unimaginable. As I looked at the paper in front of me, I realized that I had become a part of its game. This story, no matter how hard I try to avoid it, always leads me back to the beginning, a vicious circle with no way out. The room was still quiet, but the presence weighed on me, took hold of me, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. But I know one thing clearly. Every step I take, every thought I have, is a part of it. An undeniable presence, impossible to ignore, even though it is never present in any concrete form. It's a feeling that I carry around like a shadow, with no way to escape it. It exists in unseen places, in the blurred edges of reality, where it can enter undetected. I had to change the way I view the world. The nights are no longer as quiet as before. This small motel room, even though it was far from the old building, still couldn't escape that feeling. The walls no longer seemed sturdy, they enveloped me like a thick cloak. I don't dare look out the window at night. Every faint light from the street lights outside made me feel like something was looking at me, an inevitable look. Even though I try to bury the past, it keeps coming back, creeping into every thought and every dream. And as I typed these words, I noticed something strange. I can't control my hands anymore. Although my fingers still tried to put the letters on the page, words that were not mine appeared. A completely new sentence, completely different from what I could have imagined. I gasped, tried to stop, but couldn't control myself. I couldn't determine whether I was being controlled or trying to cling to my own survival. I have to face this truth. This is not a nightmare. It is a reality. A reality that has formless form, darkness but no physicality. Not only was I trapped in this room, I was also trapped in my own mind. That typewriter was more than just a tool, it was a part of me, of a fear I couldn't quell. If there's anything I can confirm now, it's that I couldn't live without it. And if I cannot escape its control, then I can only find a way to live with it. Sure, there were moments when I thought I would succumb, but I still clung to my fragile sanity. Every word I write, every sentence I type, is a small victory. But I know that it's only temporary. Reality never submits forever. Tonight, as I sat in the dark, hearing the familiar ticking sound from somewhere in the room, I understood that I would never be able to forget it. Like everything else was changed forever. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, afraid that any small movement might cause the thing to come back. The feeling of hiding in the darkness is like a nightmare that cannot be escaped. I could feel a presence right next to me, even though I couldn't see anything. There were no traces, no shadows, just a space full of menace. Suddenly, a soft laugh rang out in the darkness, repeating every word I had just written on the paper, a familiar sound, but scary. My mind raced as I tried to connect the dots, but there was only chaos. Fragments of memories danced before my eyes, blurred and incomprehensible. This house is no longer the safe place I thought it was. Every noise in the darkness, every breeze, made me feel a presence waiting for me, watching me, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had entered a world from which I could not retreat. I stood up, slowly, with heavy steps, my hands still clinging tightly to the wall lamp. My fingers were cold and numb. The smell of old perfume still lingered in the air, as if someone was nearby, too close. I don't know what to do, I don't know what I'm doing. Everything around me felt like it was on fire, but it was a cold fire, something invisible that could burn my mind. As I walked towards the door, I heard the noise again. It wasn't a step anymore, but the sound of something heavy dragging across the wooden floor, like someone was dragging themselves. The warning about the shadow I always felt following me was now clearer than ever. I can't see it, but I feel it, in every corner, in every gentle breeze. I can't help but think about my grandfather. The bay rum perfume I smelled. All those memories suddenly returned, but now they brought with them an extreme coldness, an occurrence that I couldn't escape. Is my grandfather calling me from somewhere far away? Or was there something else manipulating me, a force I couldn't understand? I have no other choice, I have to leave this house. I can't bear it anymore. But as I walked toward the door, I felt a strange tension. The door, even though it was open, seemed to not let me leave. An invisible gravitational force pulled me closer, and I began to feel something pushing me towards my office, where the silent typewriter was waiting for me, like a monster waiting for its prey. I tried to fight the urge, but my body kept walking, as if controlled. The last door slammed shut behind me, and I stood in the dark. That typewriter, still intact and silent, as if waiting to type out a new story. My fingers trembled on the keys, but I couldn't stop. This story, it seems, never ends. Every night, when the light gradually dimmed and silence spread throughout the house, I heard footsteps. This time it wasn't just the sound of a stick hitting the floor. Sometimes, the footsteps moved purposefully, no longer like before, heavy, slow steps, as if someone was controlling this space from within. I began to feel its presence in every room. The factory door I locked tightly seemed not enough. Even when I stacked things to cover them, they still moved, slowly but surely. There were no footprints, no loud noises, just an inescapable claustrophobic feeling. For the first time, I felt the threat not just from noise, but from silence. It was as stealthy as if it was watching me in every waking moment. Just when I thought I had escaped, reality pulled me back. The image of the silhouette in the photo still haunts me. Never before have I felt this way, an invisible force, shapeless but ever-present, clinging to me. One evening, I stood in front of the factory door and stared into the darkness inside. The camera is no longer useful. That photo, even though it had fallen to the ground, could still be replayed in my memory as a haunting scene. The smell of perfume floats around me, lurking in the air, like an indelible reminder. I took a deep breath, clutching the keys tightly, but the feeling of something about to happen was almost too strong to ignore. As I turned and walked out of the workshop, I knew that the silence was not the comfort I was expecting. It was an oppressive silence, as if everything had been rearranged in a chain of events that I couldn't change. The light outside seemed to weaken, everything in the house began to dim. And I know, no matter what I do, that shadow will still be there, waiting. I can't leave here. These walls have clung to me, and with each passing day, I feel that reality becomes more and more blurred. Life is no longer in this house. Every object, every wooden plank, every item in the workshop is haunted. Like shadows, they have become an inseparable part of me. Those footsteps, that shadow, that perfume, all were signs that I could never escape. All my efforts, every shadow I chased, could not escape the grip of these obsessions. It said nothing, just stood there, a pale silhouette, as if the end of an unfinished nightmare. My heart was racing, but I couldn't move. A heavy feeling filled my body, enveloping me, squeezing me in an invisible embrace of fear. The shadow rose, step by step closer to me, its cold fingers wrapped around a stick, slowly lifting it as if receiving invisible instructions. Every step it took echoed in the air, hitting my eardrums like the familiar sound of tapping sugar cane. I didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move. The cold seemed to have penetrated through the fabric of the blanket I was curled around my body, making me shiver. This presence is more than just an apparition. It was an entity, something that had snuck into this house a long time ago, waiting for my company, to take the life, to take everything I had left. Its breathing was almost inaudible, but I felt each breath, like cold waves washing over my skin. I know that I cannot run away. My eyes couldn't take my eyes off the stick in his hand. Dark fingers grasped the silver handle, grasping the memories that I had tried to bury. The shadow did not move, but its presence filled the room. The smell of rum mixed with its breath filled the air around me, and I felt pain weighing heavily on my chest. There was something approaching, something intangible, but very clear in my mind. I heard the footsteps continue, then suddenly stop. Suddenly, everything was silent. Nothing moves. There is no longer a cold feeling in the air. There were no more footsteps. It was just me, standing there, as part of a quiet room, not knowing where I had gone, not knowing where I was going. I turned my head back, slowly, little by little. My bedroom hasn't changed at all. The walls, the bed, the desk remained silent, with no trace of the presence I had just experienced. But I know clearly, that it is still here, right next to me. It hasn't gone anywhere. The shadow is still following me. Whenever I close my eyes, it is present in my dreams, an eternal, undeniable shadow. Every time I tried to forget it, the memory of the stick, the shadow, and the strong smell of rum came back like a wave. Every step I take, I feel its gaze, like a promise that I can never escape it. One evening, as I placed all the objects in their places along the hallway, I felt an unprecedented silence, an atmosphere so tense it could be cut with a knife. The figure didn't appear right away, but I sensed it somewhere in the darkness, as if watching me from a distance. Every piece of furniture in the apartment, every chair, every picture frame gives me a feeling of control, as if everything in this room is within its sight. I sat in silence, with a weak light illuminating the office. My fingers ran over the items, memories of long nights gone by. Knocking, footsteps, soft noises as if someone was checking each item. I felt its breath almost touching my skin, but I couldn't see it, couldn't understand it, even though I knew it was always near. The shadow, the stick, and the strong scent of perfume did not disappear. I began to realize that it was not an organism, but a part of this space. A presence is attached to every object, every broken piece, every dark corner in this house. Maybe I'm not the only one who has felt this presence. The people before me, the previous owners of this house, had probably faced the same thing. Will they find a way to escape from it like I am doing? Or were they immersed in the world it created? With each passing night, I felt more and more that this house was swallowing me up, little by little. The feeling of being watched, the feeling of an unseen life behind the walls, was something I couldn't escape. Just like what I discovered during those long nights, that entity does not need to be present, it does not need to appear in any specific form. It exists in objects, in space, in every step. And as I began to feel a little hope, a little relief, something inside me reminded me that this presence would never leave. My hands trembled when I thought about that. No matter where I go or what I do, I know that this home, and that presence, will always find me. The control was too strong. The things I've done, the things I've put back in place, are all just endless efforts to find a quietness that I will never have again. It was a trap, and I walked into it. As I sat there in my office, each new written word appearing on the screen like an indelible curse, I felt like I had lost the last bit of control. My fingers clutched the keyboard, shaking uncontrollably, and the screen flickered strangely. The words never stop, a new line always awaits me, and the words, keep searching, keep repeating like an encouragement from an inexplicable force. In these moments, I cannot distinguish between what is real and what is virtual. Is it me who is writing this story, or has the typewriter been controlling me all along, turning my ideas into strange shadows that I cannot control? The night continued to drag on, and I began to feel the presence of darkness more clearly than ever. The gentle scent of rum perfume invades the space, lurking around me. I heard light knocking from closed doors, from all too familiar walls. Those noises were not of a physical object but of an entity that was filling the void in my mind where I could not reach. I didn't dare turn around, I didn't dare look back anymore. The feeling of fear inside me was so strong that, even when I heard the tapping of a stick, a familiar shadow, I still couldn't face it. Finally, I understood that I couldn't run away from myself. No matter where I move, this fear will still follow me. It wasn't the typewriter, it wasn't the antiques, it was the self that had awakened, the thing I feared the most. Perhaps, the worst things in this life are not the objects beyond our control, but the things we carry in our minds, the shadows that cannot be avoided. And sometimes, we are the ones who give birth to those shadows. So, as I write these last lines, I understand that this story never ends. No matter where I hid it, the tapping of the stick echoed in my head, constantly pushing me to search for something I had created, and now, could not escape.